Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to 2015. This is our 9th committee meeting, first of the new year. For us, I think it's kind of a race to the finish. We did have a break in December, as we did last July. There'll be no more breaks between now and delivering our report in July. I want to thank you again for your commitment to Texas and for your leadership as we work together to provide the coordinating board advice and recommendations regarding the development of the next long-term strategic plan for Texas higher education. We've been working to develop a strategic plan that inspires and advances student success, and a plan that will help position Texas as a leader in an increasingly complex world economy. In your folders today is an agenda for today's meeting, the minutes, which I'll ask for approval on shortly, the biographical information of our presenters from outside the coordinating board. Hard copies of the presentations will be seen today. A document entitled Goals with Possible Targets, Indicators, and Strategies for the Next Higher Education Plan, which you're familiar with. A document entitled Feedback from Workshop Participants at the 2014 Texas Higher Education Leadership Conference. And please note that this feedback pertains to the Goals with Possible Target documents as of our last Strategic Planning Committee meeting on November the 13th. A document comparing the Senate Committee on Higher Education's recommendations for the next higher education strategic plan with the recommendations to date by our committee, and a report with from the Irish Universities Association entitled PhD Graduate Skills, a document with detailed information on student debt. We'll be using the latest version of the Goals with Possible Targets document in your packets during our working lunch and our committee discussions this afternoon. As you're aware, the coordinating board staff initially assembled this Goals with Possible Targets document to stimulate our discussion. They have been revising the document based on our deliberations and for clarity. Revisions that have been made since the November 13th version are highlighted on the copies in your folders. Thank you again to those of you who moderated panels and facilitated workshops at the Texas Higher Education Leadership Conference, Planning Educationally for Competitive Global Economy. And thanks also to those of you who attended. And we've got a list of the moderators and attendees in your packet. The conference was held here in Austin on November 20th and 21st. Presentations, panel discussions, and workshops on November 21st were focused on the potential goals, targets, strategies for the new higher education plan. The panels were videotaped, and the coordinating board's technical staff is working on uploading the edited videos onto the conference's website. As soon as these are available for viewing, Mary Smith will send us an email with a link to the website. Please expect this in early February. In terms of our agenda today, after the approval of the minutes from our November 13th meeting, we'll hear via Skype from Eva Sage-Gavin, President of Sage-Gavin Associates and the Vice Chair of the Aspen Institute's Skills for America's Future Advisory Board, on the future work skills needed by our graduates from the employer perspective. We've got her on the screen right now. Eva, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
After a discussion with Ms. Sage-Gavin, we'll hear from Richard Froscelli, labor market consultant on aligning post-secondary education and marketable skills. His special focus will be on the detailed work activity Common Language Project. Mr. Froscelli just retired in October from his most recent position at the Texas Workforce Commission as the Director of Labor Market and Career Information. Directly after Mr. Froscelli, we'll hear from Michael Lettersworth, Vice Chancellor and Chief Policy Officer of the Texas State Technical College System and the Executive Director of the Center for Employability Outcomes. Mr. Lettersworth's presentation will parallel with Mr. Froscelli's with respect to aligning post-secondary education and marketable skills. After discussion with Mr. Froscelli and Mr. Bettisworth, we'll take a short break to retrieve our lunches before coming back together as a committee to discuss our 4 proposed goals. While we're discussing each goal, but spending the majority of our discussion time on the marketable skill goal today. So we'll touch all 4, but the real discussion will be around marketable skills. So, to start our order of business today, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve our minutes of the November 13th meeting.
So moved.
All right, moved. Any opposed? None opposed. Minutes approved. Finally, before I introduce Eva, I would want to remind that each of our meetings has had a strategic focus and has featured experts from higher education and the workforce. Today, our focus is on the marketable skills goal and the potential targets and strategies for accomplishing it. So with that, unless members have any questions, I'd like to begin our discussion today by introducing Eva. Her more detailed biography is in your packet of materials, but for those of you who are joining us via the web, Eva Sage-Gavin is the president of Sage-Gavin Associates and the vice chair of the Aspen Institute's Skills for America Future Advisory Board. She works directly with senior White House leaders, community colleges, corporations to build skilled workforces. Previously, she was a member of the Human Resources Policy Association Board and chaired its Workforce Development Committee. In 2013, she became the 9th member and first woman elected to the board of directors of Sapient, a technology marketing firm based in Boston. She serves on its compensation committee. Eva was an executive leadership team member at Gap Inc. for more than 10 years and served as executive vice president of global Human Resources and Corporate Affairs. In 2006, she was elected as a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources in recognition of her lifelong professional achievement in the field of human resources. She holds a bachelor's degree in industrial and labor relations from Cornell. In 2012, Cornell honored her with a prestigious Grote Award for her professional accomplishments and outstanding service to the College of Industrial and Labor Relations. Welcome, Eva. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just check. Can you hear me clearly?
We can.
Excellent. So first of all, let me thank you for that warm introduction and the warm welcome. I also want to congratulate the committee. Since meeting David Gardner at the CAPSI conference this fall, I've had a chance to look into the goals and your targets for your Closing the Gap initiative. I am incredibly impressed. And I hope you don't mind. Another famous state, the state of California, has asked me to address them next week on the 22nd. And the first thing they asked me was what was going on in Texas.
You'll be well prepared.
Your timing is impeccable. The other thing I enjoyed were the clarity of your targets on participation, success, excellence in research, and the long-term view you've taken from what started kicking off in 1999 with a view of a 2000 to 2015 plan. When we get towards the end of my remarks, you'll notice that this long-term thinking, strong commitment, clarity of goals, and then collaboration are going to be the hallmarks of any successful partnership. The only other point I'll make on a personal note is I love the sense of competitiveness, calling out California, New York, and Massachusetts. Being a born Bostonian, educated at Cornell in New York, and marrying a Californian, I particularly appreciate your focus. But last point I would make before we jump in, you've also highlighted that much of our competitiveness is not here in the United States. It's with other superpowers in China, Korea, and Germany. And our work at Aspen Institute actually looks at global competitiveness, and I think that's an excellent point to reinforce throughout. So my goal this morning, with great guidance from Mary Smith and David, is to share some of the insights we've gathered in our time together at Skills for America's Future, to really spend about half the time sharing information, but then to stop and open up and spend the other half of our time on questions. You'll notice that I also have particularly focused on community colleges as one of our core partners. But of course, we are looking at the broader education platform all the way from high school through post-secondary. But you will see a unique focus. Our partnership is particularly strong with American Association of Community Colleges, a number of whom are well represented from the great state of Texas. So with that, if I can go to the first slide and just a simple fact to frame our discussion today. I love the title of your committee, Closing the Gap. I'm often asked, is there really a skills gap in the United States? I think this quote from Jamie Dimon in December of 2013 is one of many that talks about, at that time, 11 million Americans were unemployed, 4 million jobs sit unfilled, and the gulf between the skills that individuals have, the skills employers need. Before we go to the next slide, let me mention that in my 34 years, I've had the honor of hiring millions of employees. At Gap alone, I hired an average of 172,000 employees with an average hiring ratio of 100 applicants to one selected store sales associate. So it is an extraordinary challenge to see people who want jobs going unfilled, and on any given day, a gap between the two supply-demand curve here in the U.S. And that's been something I've been committed to solve for over 3 decades. But let's broaden that beyond our personal point of view for Jamie Dimon. If we can go to the next slide. One of the things we've been trying to do here at Aspen and with Skills for America's Future is be a place for perspectives from diverse resources. We've been working with Harvard University analyzing employer surveys of the last 2 years. And here you see a chart that shows the employer's point of view, the percentage saying they have difficulty finding the skills they need. From a low of the EPI survey, below 20%, to a high of the ADECO survey at 90%, you'll see very respected groups, Northeastern, Deloitte, Accenture, Manpower, saying that these skill gaps are anywhere from 30 to 80%. And as you know, they vary greatly by types of skills and the types of professions and what available channels for those skills are available for our U.S. employment base. So there's a lot of information coming out, and one offer I would make is things become publicly available. The Talent Sustainability Reports coming out from Human Resource Policy Association, and our work with Harvard should be coming out in Q1. I would love to make sure that you receive that to keep you updated on the employer voice and what we're beginning to see in terms of the increasing skills gap. If we could go to the next slide, I'm going to take a dive into one that's easy, I think, to understand, and it's important to all of us, and this is the Manufacturing Skills Challenge. I work closely with our chairman, Nick Pinchuk, who is the chairman and CEO of Snap-on Tools. And many of our initiatives involve collaborative efforts with academia, policymakers, state legislators, as well as what I call intermediaries or third-party groups. This is, though, in the top 5 skills shortages, one of the most severe areas that I know many of you are very, very familiar with. From a skilled resource shortage of 79% to a high of 78% for highly skilled manufacturing resources, there's an estimate by Accenture that these skills shortages cost the manufacturing industry about 11% of total earnings. We have data for multiple industries, but I think this one is very, very clear in terms of our competitiveness and the impact on our ability to grow. If we can go to the next slide, the situation is changing rapidly. This chart shows the number of unemployed persons per job opening going back to 2004 and updated for January 2014. A quick scan shows that at one point we had 7 applicants for every 1 job opening. We are now down to, on average, seasonally adjusted, 2 applicants for every 1 job opening. When you get down to about 5.6%, again, many of you are deeply steeped in this, you start looking at unlocking the potential of some workforces that have been underemployed, but you also look at new tools, resources that may be required by the change in the decrease. 7-to-1 versus 2-to-1 is a drastic shift for us just since January of 2009. The implications of this, we've spent a lot of time talking with employers across the country and globally, is constraints on economic growth, national competitiveness, and firm profitability. During my tenure as chairman of the Workforce Development Committee for HR Policy Association, where we have 350 of the nation's largest employers come together, on any given day, we were posting directly from those 350 companies an average of 250,000 open jobs. So you can imagine how quickly and radically this picture is changing as far as the available workforce. If I can go to the next slide, back to this idea of closing the gap. I'm incredibly honored to work with academic officers, business leaders, policymakers at the state, regional, and national level. So this quote from John Ager in the Huffington Post in April is particularly, I think, disturbing because I think incredible efforts are going on from all sides. Yeah. But this claims that 96% of university and college academic officers are confident in their ability to prepare students for success. However, just 11% of business leaders strongly agree that today's college graduates have the skills and competencies their businesses need. I was often asked in my role with workforce development and in my current role, why is there such a huge gap between perceptions and what are the core issues? HR Policy Association took a 2-year effort to get to what are the big headlines on this gap. And I'll give you a simple example of something we learned from the U.S. Postal Service. We had PhDs graduating with extraordinarily rigorous academic curriculum, algorithmic capabilities, the ability to plot postal routes using artificial intelligence and other capabilities. But when things like teamwork and collaboration were required, soft skills, business presentations, we talk about business numeracy and literacy. Every one of the employer groups on the council said that a disproportionate amount of time was required to get people to day one productivity because of numeracy, literacy, communication, and collaboration needs. The shift from being able to communicate on social media, texting, and other instant forms of communication to professional business communication was often the first challenge from the very beginning. So I'm going to keep going. If I'm going too fast, someone in the room raise their hand, but I'm very sensitive to opening this up for your questions. Let's talk a bit about, on the next slide, then, what are we seeing as far as connections? And again, I've used examples from community colleges, but these examples are as relevant from any strong partnerships that we participate in today. The headlines here are education and training support with two-way dialogue, feedback, goal clarity, and ongoing partnership are critical. Leadership and commitment to development. On the third bullet down, fourth down, the whole idea of working together, students, business, industry, and of course policymakers, with some governance mechanisms such as the team we have assembled today. Clarity of information and staying connected with labor market. When we formed the Workforce Development Committee, there was a clear sense that employers don't do a great job in any clear and consistent ways on advising their partners on employment forecasting or critical skills far enough in advance to adequately prepare the talent pipelines. Experiential investments, internships, summer jobs, apprenticeships, have been extraordinary and successful outcomes. Recognizing progress, credentials, hiring, promotion, direct student support, scholarship support, and preparedness, particularly in those life skills. Faculty support, adjunct, faculty investments in case studies, real life work experiences, externships, and reverse mentoring. There's a lot on this page, and my sense is we will likely return to it, but I think the big message is many of the components that exist with the CTG program today are the benchmark for success in ongoing partnership between academia, policymakers, business, and third-party intermediaries that can provide ongoing and consistent information to adjust in a rapidly changing employment world. If I can go to the next slide, I thought you might enjoy a few examples from other states that are creating innovative and agile forms of partnership. I recently attended a conference at Boeing, hosted in the Washington State area. And again, this is a Center of Excellence approach from community colleges. But they've created in Washington 10 centers focused on their key economic centers, and each is based in a lead community college. They act as institutional outreach for an industry. So imagine a Boeing Corporation connected with the Center of Excellence for Aerospace and Advanced Manufacturing, or a Microsoft connected with information and computing technology. The idea is to keep these communication channels on an ongoing basis and to get specific by industry sector, geography, and then to share that across the state. Coordinating system efforts, and then coaching and mentoring to other colleges. If there are other state models like this, haven't quite seen them yet, it is a very different approach, would not necessarily work in a very large state, but quite creative. And we had the opportunity to hear from each Center of Excellence and their business partner. And it was clear that they had built a tremendous partnership. And many of the principles I talked about earlier about that skills sharing were clear because of this ongoing long-term strategic commitment to two-way dialogue. If I can go to the next slide and share another example with you. This is the Louisiana WISE Fund, Workforce and Innovation. And you'll notice that some of these have more of an economic focus. So in this case, there's a $40 million 4-in-1 funding match for employer contributions to career development programs. We also partner closely with JP Morgan Chase in their national initiative, and they provided a $1 million funding vehicle to support programs for high growth industries, particularly focused on the state's most disadvantaged students, those without a high school diploma or equivalency. Others like Praxair are also directly involved. And this is a great example of the manufacturing need. Their focus is to grow a pipeline of students on a welding program because they literally are having trouble filling any of their welding positions, including the entry-level roles. Next slide. I know New York was an area of expressed interest from your website. This was just a small program, but this is the job linkage program that rewards community colleges that partner with employers and demonstrate the ability to provide students a path to meaningful employment. As you can see, it's a very small fund at $3 million. The idea here, though, I think directionally, is that it leverages recognition, reward, and success-based outcomes. And I know that's very, very important from the work that you've laid out, the goals that you've set, and the tremendous success you've achieved. So since New York was an area of focus, I thought that might be one that would be of interest to you. If we could go to the next slide, I'm going to step back a bit from the state examples and do a landscape scan of what we've seen in terms of successful outcomes wherever they originate from. Deeply engaged leaders who are role modeling what they seek from others, continually driving the program forward with short and long-term goals, are clearly evident of where we've seen the most successful programs. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, a 15-year program, in many cases in which in Texas I've noticed you achieve some of these goals at the 7 years early. In other cases, you achieved it in 11 years against a 15-year trajectory, would be one of the most long-term strategic horizons we've witnessed in any of the teams that we've been honored to address. So I guess with great respect, I say check, check, check on all of these architecture models that you've put in place to ensure success. And I'm very much looking forward to what your next strategic plan will deliver. I think we talked about, or I overheard July is the delivery date. If I can go to the next slide, the concept here is that we're looking at communities operating as an aligned system. I've talked about leadership and the cornerstone of community systems, but I want to also mention the idea of detailed plans that have a workforce and an economic improvement aspect with clear goals that are measurable, public, and then problem solving when there are goal shortfalls with creative and agile changes as economic or state conditions change. The other thing we've learned, everyone asks me, is what's the one formula for success? And should it be national? Should it be regional? Should it be state? Should it be a community center or city-based? And the answer that we're finding is that every ecosystem is unique. No one model can be scaled or duplicated at a national level without taking into account the very, very unique industry, geography, economic, and demographic profile that exists in each local community. So our answer is typically yes to all of the above. We need policy advocacy at a national level. We need industry familiarity at a national and regional and state level. We need employer sharing more clearly further in advance on where future skill needs will be to allow educators and policymakers to fill those pipelines decades in advance of need. And then we need a sharing model that transfers best practices with a healthy spirit of competitiveness, but also clarity that we see in other countries. Germany was pulled out as an example, that some of these ecosystems are actually part of the institutional fabric. And so we're trying to create models that support this in the style appropriate for our country and each of our state systems. Next slide, please. One of the most powerful partnerships are those that are agile, adaptive, and in post-secondary educational institutions. Again, at Skills for America's Future, we realized in our first 5 years that we couldn't tackle the entire partnership opportunity, so we chose to anchor with community colleges for reasons I know would be obvious to the committee. We really focused on the idea of were there capabilities from industry that could be transferred to community colleges and directly to adult learners or learners in a short turnaround credential that would deliver employment, often then building to secondary college a completion of a 4-year degree and beyond. What we're finding is that agility on both sides. Agility of employers to provide knowledge, tools, resources, in some case laboratory equipment or funding, and then the agility of the academic community to be able to deliver credentialed outcomes against that directionally, produce some of the most successful partnerships. A commitment from the local employers to then invest in internships, apprenticeships, and externships for adjunct professors for our academic leaders tended to be the pillars of the most successful outcomes to date. I have many examples of that, but if I can go to the next slide, there are just a few here. Whoops, excuse me, let's go back. I have a few on my cheat sheet that you don't have on yours that I would love to talk about and just give you a bit of a bird's eye view. One of them is the McDonald's English Under the Arches program, and one of them is the Gapping for Community Colleges program. Since I came from Gap after 11 years of serving as the head of human resources and global corporate affairs, I can explain that one most simply. As you may know, of the 250,000 jobs that are available on any given day here in the HR Policy Association website, WeHireAmerica.com, 21% of them are in retail or service-based roles, similar hospitality, food, etc. Gapping for Community Colleges was born to transfer knowledge to community colleges as part of a pilot, frankly, for job and interview skills as community service. An interesting thing happened when store leaders who conducted seminars on job skills, interviewing, impact and presence, communications, and time management became exposed to community college professionals and adult learners in 7 cities with some of the highest unemployment in the country. They discovered an untapped or undertapped talent pipeline. 5 years later, $250,000 of foundation funding and grants has been redirected to community college scholarships, and 20,000 learners have been hired. This is one where the idea of testing something intended for one outcome, which was to transfer skills-based knowledge to help people find jobs, turned into an underdeveloped talent pipeline. Some of the other examples we see in Skills for America's Future include work with Accenture on their Skills to Succeed program, Donald's English Under the Arches, that helps people with English as a second language, the UPS apprenticeship programs many of us are familiar with. We have work going on in Memphis with Southwest Community College. There's a national pilot going on with Southern New Hampshire Community College in terms of online credentials. And I could go on and on, literally all over the United States. There are these agile, innovative, strategic partnerships that comprised of teams that look very much like the team that I have the honor of addressing today. I'm going to wrap up my remarks with an offer to you. I didn't put it in the materials, but I'm happy to send it along. That looks a little further out at the horizon that you're looking at beyond what I've shared so far this morning. I'm leaving you this morning to head down to the Institute of the Future, and I've been working with them on the Future of Work Skills 2020. Some of you may be familiar with this work, but with their permission, I'll be happy to send it along to Mary and ask her to share it with the committee. And what we've been looking at is 2020 and beyond. What are the core skills students of today will need to be workers and leaders of tomorrow? If you'll allow me to share those verbally, and again, I'm happy to, with the Institute's permission, share these in writing. There are 10 themes and skill areas that we are being told as talent suppliers that are going to be critical. The idea of transdisciplinary. We talk about the leader of tomorrow will need to be T-shaped, deep in an area of expertise with the ability to be broad and lateral thinkers across a variety of disciplines. The concept of social intelligence and the ability to immediately establish rapport, read social cues, adjust and adapt to be able to work in virtual and collaborative relationships. New media literacy. The thought of doing a Skype broadcast with you 5 years ago would probably not have been the top of our preferred list for you or for me. But I'd like to congratulate the committee that today we're role modeling new media literacy, new channels, and one of the other key areas, which is the idea of virtual collaboration. As you know, in Texas and California, there's nothing more important than cross-cultural competency. This is highlighted as one of the core skills that will be particularly important for our leaders of tomorrow. Other key areas are about thinking skills, the idea of computational thinking, the ability to use judgment, to see patterns and trends, and to look at things beyond an algorithm or rules-based logic, which computers are excellent at, to use the skills that only humans possess to be able to make sense of information. Cognitive load management. I call that getting out of the email inbox overload. But that'll be seen as one of the 10 core skills. How to deal with this information that's coming at us, extract that, make sense of it, and then be able to apply it to our chosen careers. And then the final one is a design mindset. The ability to design with the end in mind. Many of you are hearing the concept of sustainability built into products from the very beginning of the design. And there's this emerging concept called cradle-to-cradle thinking, that products are developed with the thought that when they end of life, they can be recycled and become the rebirth of new products. So I will stop there. We went more quickly than half our time because I'm extremely interested in your questions. I've given you a tiny sampling of all the areas that we're working on here at Skills for America's Future, and the Aspen Institute, and the vast partnerships we have with academic leaders, community leaders, leaders in the administration, other groups like the Council for Competitiveness, Human Resource Policy Association, and then the individual leaders and presidents that comprise the Council of Competitiveness and the American Association of Community Colleges. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for the honor to address you. And David, thank you for being willing to listen to me twice. I'd like to stop and open it up to any questions you have in the time we have left.
Thank you, Eva. One thing I neglected to ask you is whether you want to make any comments about the Aspen Institute. I'm very familiar with it and have participated in some of the programs, but I'm not sure that the committee as a whole has. So any comments that you might about the organization and how your particular piece of the workforce fits in?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'd hoped to do that at some point, and I neglected to do that in the beginning. So as you know, the Aspen Institute is over 80 years old, and it's founded with the principle of stimulating dialogue on issues of global importance in a unique and open sharing environment. It's probably most famous for its annual convening at the Aspen Ideas Festival, which is held every summer in Aspen, Colorado. You will see within the Aspen Institute over 30 divisions with leadership in a variety of areas. The group that we're associated with in Skills for America's Future is within the Economic Opportunities Division. But many of you are familiar with Walter Isaacson and his incredible thought leadership as the president and chairman of Aspen, and things like technology, innovation, the arts, If you haven't had an opportunity to participate in a festival or a community speaking engagement, let me just share that the convening each summer brings together some of the most extraordinary thought leaders from literally every walk of life and every sector of the world. I will give you an example that perhaps best paints the diversity of the participants in the thought leadership work of Aspen Institute. And the opening kickoff, we had Indra Nooyi open the session. Tony Blair addressed the group, Al Gore, Secretary Hillary Clinton. We later had addresses coming from leaders in the arts, cabinet members. We had breakout sessions in every single aspect you can imagine. One of the key areas for Aspen that is a new and emerging area is health, wellness, and every aspect of that, from neuroscience to cognitive ability. It's become such a huge area of focus that the Aspen Festival has now added additional days for people that just want to come in and focus on spotlight in the health area. It's nonpartisan. It is an incredibly open environment, welcome to very diverse points of view, and happy to share links to any of the information in terms of the broader Aspen Institute. In terms of Skills for America's Future, we were born in October of 2010 as a result of a response to the extraordinary, difficult economic environment we found ourselves in. The individuals responsible for kicking off Skills for America's Future were Penny Pritzker, partnering with the PRAB board. That was, as you know, the President's Economic Advisory Board, Economic Recovery and Advisory Board, led by Jeff Immelt. I was leading the GAP effort at the time. There were 6 core companies that volunteered to be part of a pilot test between community colleges, employers, and policymakers. And today, that's grown into Skills for America's Future, housed at the Aspen Institute, with 300 virtual partnerships, 43 core employers, and then this extensive network of interconnected partnerships with academia, leaders in government at the state, regional, and national level, as well as our academic partners. Our board looks a lot like your board in terms of the diversity of our backgrounds, but I would say we skew a little bit more to the demand side because we recognize that of all the areas of opportunity, more clarity from employers on the demand side with more advanced planning of the skills needed for tomorrow was requested to get ahead of some of these talent pipeline and skill gap issues. Our chairman's Nick Pinchuk, as I mentioned, who's the chairman of Snap-on Tools. When Penny Pritzker went on to take the Secretary of Commerce role, she seated Nick and I, as Nick is the chair, I'm the vice chair, and our director is John Holborn, who is our full-time dedicated resource based out of New York and commuting around the country for our DC team and in Aspen. So I'll stop there. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Eva. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the committee for questions, and starting with Dr. Faulkner.
Thank you. I'd like actually to make one comment and 2 questions. The comment is that if anyone can figure out a solution to email overload, I'm sure higher education will be glad to teach it. The questions are actually comments, really. But I'd like to come back to your slide on manufacturing skills challenges, where the question is, how severe is your shortage of qualified applicants? And what I'd like to point out is that as I've been in councils of people who hire large numbers of people in skilled industries, not all manufacturing, but some manufacturing, some, say, oil field service people, they constantly comment on the fact that skills aren't always the issue. People who can pass the drug test are, in their experience, that's the valve. So I think if you're going to ask a question like, well, you didn't do this anyway, Accenture did it, but if the question is asked, how severe is your shortage of qualified applicants? The answers may not just be about skills. There's more involved in the minds of hirers, in my experience. You may want to comment on that. I want to comment on one more of your slides. Go ahead.
I could not agree with you more. And when you get down to a 5.6% unemployment rate, sometimes what you find is, as you said, individuals who might have other factors affecting their employability. I ran the GAP Foundation, and our focus was on underserved youth. And clearly for individuals and students who were wards of the state or wards of the court within a state system, we could not have successfully supported them for internships without literally a team. Caseworkers, some of the issues you mentioned about substance were all part of the picture. And we're finding, as you know, when you get down into parts of the community where someone may have the skill, but there are other things preventing them from being fully employed, it takes a lot of creative solutions working together. Not to mention balancing that with the public safety and looking at all the aspects that you have to look at as an employer and as policymakers. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, the message really, for me anyways, just don't overdrive the data. It's not necessarily all about skills. The other one is another don't overdrive the data, and that's the 96% of college and university chief academic officers are confident, and 11% of business leaders agree that today's graduates have the skills and competencies that their businesses need. I've been talking to business hirers for 40 years, and they always want more from us. But mostly what they want is more tailored graduates for their business. And that's, I think when one gets an answer like this, you have to separate out discrepancies in what we're supplying that is reasonable to expect versus just not having in the skills, among the skills of graduates, the more detailed kinds of skills that are needed in a particular business. I also found that lots of hirers would like to have greater maturity. They'd like to have people who are more grown up than graduates are. And that's a significant issue. Things take time. Things that take an actual immersion in the business aren't really realistic to be produced by higher educational institutions. And that's always been a disconnect. I mean, in my experience, that's been a decades-long disconnect. And I think we have to make the call on what we do generally with students before they enter the workforce in the most practical way we can. That's not saying I'm unsupportive of better aligning the skills of people graduating with what's needed in the workforce. I'm absolutely for that. I'm just saying don't overdrive the 96 to 11 because I think these people may be looking at things from different perspectives.
Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. And we knew this would be quite a stimulating slide. One of the ideas in here, too, your point is the time to productivity. And back to your point, whether it's social skills, showing up on time, being able to communicate beyond short text messages or Snapchats. Often we hear in the brightest students, there's a couple of years of maturing in the workforce that no one has figured out how to solve that. The closest approximation we hear is that internship or apprenticeship exposure. But as you know, there's other elements, just experiential living, that factor into someone's readiness. So I share your point of view on that. Colleges and universities and community colleges, academics can only do so much. Life skills are gained outside the classroom.
It helps when young people get older.
I say that every day to my 19-year-old, but the sophomore, she's not buying it.
Commissioner?
Yes, I have a question about universities. I agree that community colleges are more flexible and more agile, and that they because they have a dual mission of academic and workforce work, I think they're more attentive to marketability of their graduates, their completers. So I worry more about how well universities do in this regard. I think that by and large, professional schools, engineering schools, for example, schools of education do a decent job of preparing their graduates for the workforce. I worry about the arts, the humanities, the social sciences. What do you know about what's going around the country at universities to make sure that graduates in those broad disciplines are better prepared to enter the workforce?
Well, David, you were there for this spirited debate, and I certainly have the honor of teaching at Cornell University as an executive in residence, and I was brought in to the Industrial and Labor Relations School, to bring practical business knowledge, and that is one of the more applied universities. So we often find ourselves in spirited debate and try to stay above the differences in the preparedness between, professional degrees, BSs in engineering or industrial and labor relations or others, and a very diverse liberal arts, broad-based background. Our point is often, what's the person's preparedness for some of these higher level skills? The idea of are they effective communicators day one to learn training materials that might be provided by the employer? Regardless of their field of study, can they be effective in business communications? Some of the other teamwork and collaboration, cross-cultural. So part of the spirit of the debate was that many employers now cannot meet their needs with a number of graduates coming from professional 4 or more degree programs. So they're getting creative and broadening their lens to graduates with very diverse degrees and broad liberal arts degrees, recognizing that they need to make a technical investment upon hire to transfer knowledge as far as the industry, the employer's specific product or service, and what the measures of success would be. The whole world looks different, I will say, in a 5.6% unemployment model versus 10 plus. And I'm seeing a lot more partnerships forming and new sources of employees being tapped that would not have been everyone's first stop. And it's opening up, I think, more dialogue with phenomenal liberal arts graduating students who have all these other high-level skills and just need more clarity around a good match in terms of their technical aptitude and interest and capabilities.
Other questions? Yeah, I've got one for Eva. You touched on it earlier from a policy, on where policy is most appropriate. California, who you're going to address next week, is the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. If it standalone, Texas is about number 12. So we have very large, very diverse economies with multiple regions that are not only compete against each other, but are compete against other places, other regions in the world. So I guess my own view has been is increasingly the regions are taking the leadership in providing solutions around workforce and education because they're feeling the competitive That's where the competitive impact is first. How do we compete against, some region in Houston versus somewhere in China? What skills do we need to be able to do that? And so we're a state policy-making entity or an advisory entity to a state agency. So it's a kind of a tops-down approach, but I always come back to this sense that is competition going to drive us in a regional way, and how do we incorporate that flexibility, I guess is what I'm asking, and what are you seeing policy-wise?
Thank you. And if you let me give some examples of California that are public so that we can use it as only as illustrative. Not dissimilar to Texas, you've got an agricultural industry, you've got a media entertainment, you've got a technology with the Silicon Valley. And I'll just use those three for a moment because, very clear. What California is trying to do is do a industry cut with representatives who are deeply steeped technically in those industries. And you can imagine the difference in the needs for Silicon Valley, in terms of software engineers versus a Fresno, California, or a Bakersfield in terms of the agribusiness and different issues such as immigration couldn't be more different. What they're also looking at, bringing their industry expertise, is if we don't solve this for California, to your point, what other states may have a more welcoming environment for work that doesn't have to be done within the state borders. Some are looking at it even more globally. And my mind is focused very much on the earlier question about universities. But for example, the idea of entry-level technicians in any industry. Automotive is one that is not necessarily a premium in California, but obviously incredibly critical in a Detroit area. And the idea that BMW and Germany has close to zero youth unemployment. Students, as you may know, are tracked and identified in 8th or 9th grade. Career assessments and aptitude and skill match assessments are done, and then technical tracks are laid out. With many of these jobs and some of these industries being seen as aspirationally achievable, role model, and having tremendous respect. So one of the things I'm seeing by industry is the idea of how do we rebuild some of the pipes to these pretty extraordinary, what we call middle skills jobs, and jobs that can't be outsourced, that aren't going to go to another country, that have to be done on Main Street. As you said when you explained my background, I've crossed 5 industries, and all have unique capabilities, from technology to food services to retail to business. And so what I'm seeing is each of these industry cuts, however they're organized. I gave you the Washington State example, but the team next week is forming this board of governors with industry representatives. The idea that what are career paths? So entry points, career paths. How does one get to middle wage, middle skills jobs, and what's required as a team, educationally, funding, and support services that we talked about outside of the classroom or the workplace. And then the last point would be, what are the ultimate career goals, income opportunities in each of these industries? And how do we deal with the oversupply in some degree programs, but not resulting in jobs that maybe applicants want, with the undersupply in others, where kids drop out of some of the STEM disciplines before they even have a chance to pursue it post-grad or post-high school. So I'd say Washington and California are two examples that are taking that industry slice and doing it a little bit differently than I'm seeing in other states.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Yes, Shirley. Sorry.
Eva, my background is in public education, and we take new teachers that come from many universities all over the United States, not just Texas, and we take them where they are and mentor them. They are assigned a mentor. We have kids right out of college coming into the classroom that probably have never purchased a car, signed a loan, set up a bank account, grocery shopped. If they've been in a dorm or apartment, they've worked and gone to school. And when we see the potential in a first-year teacher, we want to do everything we can to make that teacher feel support and provide them the training. And we invest a great deal of money in training and staff development. And I know employers have great concerns about that. They want the employee to be everything and come in 100% ready to hit the ground running. Mm-hmm. But you do have to spend additional time and money, and because to me the return on that investment is getting an employee that will have that longevity, that will stay in the profession and that will feel the support, because for many of them it may even be their first time away from home, and they're in another state. So in public education we're competing with salaries, certainly lots of other things, and so we want to make sure we also address their social needs, their personal needs. And people can say, oh, that's not your job. Yes, it is. If you really value this first-year teacher, you're going to reach out to him or her and do everything you can. And it may not just be for 1 year. It may be several years until they get to become that master teacher. But it's about, I look at that slide where you talked about the architecture and the leadership. You have to have that leadership and that desire and that interest to make the new employee feel vested, have ownership, and that you really care. And I think the payoff is there.
Thank you for making that a comment. One of the programs, I don't know if you've seen it, but it is a teacher investment program that GE sponsors. I double check my facts, but I believe it's in the Atlanta area, and it is teachers that are in the STEM disciplines. They're deployed, all expenses covered, into GE sites. And the goal would be to give them real practical case studies that are interesting and fun, frankly, they can bring back to their classrooms. When we were doing the early work of scouting for innovative best practices, this came up as one of the most effective, and that obviously the teacher feedback was extraordinary, but the student feedback as well, because they would give examples about, working on wind turbines and very practical applied examples with pictures and experiential, and they were actually physically there. There's a part of me that wishes that we could have that level of investment nationally, because, on a personal note, I come from a family of teachers, and it all begins there in terms of the investment and the impact. One of the things that's tough in this job is we look at the amount of money being spent by everyone, academic world, students, our state and our national levels, and there's been a lot of reports that have quantified that. Ready to Work, HR Policy Association did an estimate of $52 billion of investment on employers, by employers in training. And we want every penny to deliver these sustained outcomes. So what I'm seeing in this changing environment of going from 10% unemployment to 5.6 is creativity everywhere and reverse mentoring and reverse learning. The other thing that our first-year teachers bring, and frankly many of our interns bring, are currently still in college, is extraordinary capability in these new social media tools and new forms of communication and virtuality. And I'm seeing it, particularly out here in the Silicon Valley, this reverse mentoring as almost a standard in some of the most innovative companies, where executives that may be 30 years into our career are connected with a recent college grad. And all kinds of good sharing is going on about collaboration and communications. And I'm seeing that happening academically as well, new teachers connecting with tenured senior teachers, bringing some of those brand new tools and skills that they learned into the classroom and into the community. So I'm very hopeful that our millennials, who are very purpose-driven and impact and mission-driven, represent a whole new wave of educators that require us to absolutely invest in them.
Okay. Next question, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Eva, first, thank you for the information. I think it's very, very helpful. Steve Lyle with Texas Instruments. I know you're familiar with the company.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So the information that you shared, just some comments, and it goes a little bit to what Larry was saying. When I'm looking at the manufacturing challenges, you're spot on. I do believe that some of the issues Larry mentioned are very true. You have a lot of fallout because of some social type of issues going on that has nothing to do with skills. However, at least at TI, primarily we hire engineers and technologists. You have to have some technical savviness to get in the door. We're seeing where just basic skills through our pre-assessment testing, they cannot pass, even after having gone through what may be considered a rigorous technical course or field of study. So it's kind of interesting, and I think there's some work that needs to be done there. Secondly, kind of goes back to the slide that had the 96 and the 11%. I think you do have to de-aggregate the data for it to really make sense, maybe by industry. But I think the message there is pretty loud and clear. There is a gap, and when I have looked at this type of data, again, a little bit lower to the semiconductor industry, there's still a disconnect. And I think that we're beginning to understand a little bit more about what the disconnect is. And I think it's, again, much more narrower in the semiconductor industry, in that there would maybe be a 20% to 30% gap between what professors think, educators think, and what we think as business leaders. You're definitely spot on when you talk about the types of skills that go beyond technical skills, that universities and community colleges typically do a very good job of, for example, training technicians, training engineers, and they can do the technical work. It's what happens when they enter into the doors of a corporation, and all those things that you mentioned come into play: the teamwork, the interpersonal skills, the social skills, communications, all of that. What's interesting is that I think that business leaders, we do not do a good job of describing what that looks like in a corporate environment. And I think on the university campuses and community college campuses, educators are not modeling those behaviors for students. So they don't get to see, they may get to experience the technical depth of their professor or their educator. They're not, in a lot of cases, and again, I'm speaking more from a more technical perspective, technical educators, the students are not seeing the educator communicate well, the educator team well with other professors. So I think there needs to be modeling on both ends for a student to really get the experience that they need and be well prepared to deal with some things in the corporate environment. And then lastly, as it relates to ways employers connect with community colleges, I absolutely agree with comments that I think we've made in a few of the meetings on the need to come together as partners. And it truly is an ecosystem. And at least at TI, innovation is what we are. And we tend to want to create and help accelerate ecosystems of innovation in our major hubs, like California, like Texas, where we bring high schools together with community colleges, with higher ed institutions, and try to collectively solve the problems. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Steve. And there are 3 community college partners in Texas. At the risk of leaving out anyone, I won't call them out, but extraordinary. And one of the things I'll need advice on after leaving today is I cannot tell you how impressed I am with this committee. And when we looked at the anchors of what success looks like, so I will never share anything that's not a matter of public record, but this hits every criteria for the effectiveness of teams working together.
Laurie?
Yes, I want to thank you as well. I think that everything that you've said has really underscored our feelings and the work that we have done, and in particular with the nimbleness and adaptivity of community colleges and their potential of training, the workforce, what they're already doing, and the potential of doing even more. A couple of thoughts that I had that could help us, I think, in the future. It dawned on me that House Bill 5 is really going to begin to reflect on focusing those high school students into those positions of employability, as opposed to potentially in the past a high school student graduating and then trying to decide what he or she may want to focus on. Although initially, admittedly, I was not a huge proponent of House Bill 5, I think that this has a great potential in how we're going to begin to measure these high school graduates and where they are going and in what capacity House Bill 5 has maybe impacted that focus. Secondly, I'm reminded of the Greater Houston Partnership's recent summit, and it's called Upskills Houston, which is looking at middle skills in particular. And I think that could be a tremendous impact on where our focus is going as far as employability. And with your permission, I'll ask the Greater Houston Partnership to send a copy to the committee members and to the coordinating board. I think it would be really helpful to see what they're determining, are the critical elements and how we could leverage that as well and measure their data.
Well, Eva, you'd mentioned, and following what Lori said there, the German model, where they pre-select at a relatively early age. It's a very homogeneous, country. I think our dialogue that we've had that in this country, particularly Texas, which is more diverse than any other state, even than California, whether that is really feasible, and because it brings up a lot of historical, civil rights, and other issues. So I would be interested to see, do you think the German model at some level can actually work in this country?
Well, that's a big question. Thank you. I'm going to go back to your comment earlier, which is the idea of matching people with their strengths and starting early. And what I think is most successful, regardless of country, state, or national origin, is this idea that if students start thinking in 5th, 6th grade, we're finding in a pilot we've been watching in California, funded by the Pearson Foundation, that the idea of capturing 9th graders and beginning to look at their aptitude and match and providing more active guidance about, whether they're skewed to more of a data analytic model or they're more appropriate in social studies and thinking. We found that is the critical year. So long before the first community college or college application is put in, that this idea of what might this lead to, how does that play to your strengths, and then how do we look at resources being made available to and channeled, is probably a common idea. The one thing I think we all agree is the worst possible outcome would be someone who chooses a field, they finish their 4-year degree, they have compiled debt, and it's a field that they know they're not interested in. And perhaps they just didn't understand that, or they weren't aware of where the career outcome could be, or they weren't able to get the mentoring that they needed to make good choices. I think we're all acutely aware with guidance counselors often having 1 to 800 student ratios. That is very different than we see in some other countries where, people are looking at, hey, what's going to be the best likely match to your skill set and background? And I respect the challenge of that.
Bernie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had to step out on your presentation for 10 minutes, so I apologize if my question is redundant. But we have political ways of understating the unemployment rate. Those who give up looking aren't counted and that kind of a thing. Do you find them in your studies, in the data that you collect and use for making decisions?
Thank you. I probably would have gone the whole session without mentioning that. We did not cover that. And one of the things we've been working on is the long-term unemployed. I had the honor of speaking at the Sloan School this fall. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Professor Ofer Sharon, but he's been doing some very detailed research on folks who are underemployed. And this idea that they become hidden. We took this on at Skills for America's Future in Chicago because, as you probably also know, underemployment can take all shapes and sizes. It can be PhDs. It can be laid off teachers, you name it. I mean, I think you have a sense for it. And tested it, actually seeking to bring long-term unemployed into Skills for Chicagoland's Future, and then working actively to place them, whether it was a reskills, a retraining, a relaunch. And in some cases, if they had been out of the workforce for 3 to 5 years, it was a confidence building and reconnecting them back in. I actually was in D.C. last January. I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman who'd been an insurance broker, diverse-owned, minority-owned business, had been out of the workforce for 3+ years. And without getting into all the details, when we were looking for folks for health insurance for the major effort to sign people up, this gentleman doesn't have a formal degree, but I understand that he scored the highest on the insurance intake exam because of his 30 years experience. He became reemployed. He's now in a great fit. Health insurance has a lot of comparability to the other areas of insurance he was familiar with. And it's a great story for all of us to understand. So you are absolutely on a core issue that we believe does understate the 5.6%. There are many, particularly over certain ages, that have given up, that may be doing part-time work or pro bono work, that feel they can't go back into the workforce because of some of these either skill barriers, industry changes, or they didn't have the completed credentials that kicked them out of many of our employment screening systems. So thank you for bringing that up.
Any more questions for Eva? Last chance. Okay, well, I think that brings our session to conclusion. I want to thank you, Eva, very much. Hope to see you at an Ideas Festival sometime. And it's been very helpful. Thank you. And I look forward to any follow-on information that you would like to send us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank the whole team here. What a great experience from one virtual learner to another set of virtual learners. And particularly for David to stay on it. And Mary, you are a delight to work with. This has been a pleasure. If there's anything that comes out of the committee that I can share with other progressive states, please let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Okay, now I'd like to continue our discussions by introducing Mr. Richard Rochelle and Mr. Michael Bettersworth, who's been with us for this discussion. Their more detailed bios are in your folder of materials, but for those joining the web, I will give you a quick bio on both of them. Richard is a labor market consultant and speaker. He's the former director of the Labor Market and Career Information Department of Texas Workforce Commission. In that role, he served as the chief labor market economist and was responsible for executing over $5.8 million of varied grant responsibilities in the areas of labor market, career information, economic development, statistical development, dissemination, and training. Prior to his work with Texas state government, Mr. Rochelle conducted in-service training with the National Labor Market Information Training Institute at the University of North Texas in the areas of strategic planning and regional economic analysis for the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act and Job Training Partnership Act Employment and Training Program. At the University of North Texas, he also taught courses in microeconomics, regional labor market analysis, workforce strategic planning. Mr. Rochelle earned his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Texas in Austin and his master's degree in manpower and industrial relations from the University of North Texas. Michael Bettersworth is the Vice Chancellor and Chief Policy Officer at the Texas State Technical College System. Shortly after Joining TSTC in 2002, Michael founded TSTC Forecasting to identify and analyze new technical competencies needed by employers. TSTC Forecasting has published over 28 studies on emerging technologies and occupations, leading to new college curricula in nanotechnology, biotechnology, energy, video games, manufacturing, healthcare, among other topics. Mr. Bettisworth's current work focuses on developing a newer higher education funding model based on Exeter earnings, the use of real-time labor market data for curriculum alignment, college program evaluation using placement and earnings data, and curriculum development through a common skills language in partnership with the Texas Workforce Commission. Mr. Bettisworth earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in telecommunication, his Master's of Arts Communication Studies from Baylor University. I'd like to welcome both of you, and understand you're going to kind of work together in your presentation today.
We certainly will work together. Isn't that the hallmark of Texas state government and former Texas state government employees? So we hope we're representative of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I will start off with my remarks and then transition. But before I do, I want to real briefly address the question that Mr. Francis just did. When we start talking about the unemployment rate, and coming from that background, I'm very familiar with how that rate is calculated, and the demographic side of that is there is a component of the unemployment rate that is a structural unemployment component, and it deals with long-term unemployed. And we don't usually like to use the word unemployable persons, because we believe everybody has certain skills and talents that can be applied in the labor market. But there are certain there's a large segment of the unemployed that are structurally unemployed with what we would call perhaps deficits in soft skills or workplace basics in their employability. And in the post-recession period, in this post-Great Recession period, what we've ended up with is that chunk of the population is much higher than it's been in previous years. So while the overall unemployment rate continues to drift down, that chunk that is essentially the unemployable, quotes on both sides of that, has continued to stay relatively high, which means the gap between the actual unemployment rate and these long-term or structurally unemployable people is relatively small. So everybody that can work, has the skills to work, is pretty much getting absorbed into the labor market. It does bring up really interesting challenges going forward about finding an available labor force as the baby boomer generation starts moving its way through the program and the like. And of course, Dr. Murdoch would be our expert here to be able to address those related issues. But I just wanted to mention the fact that it is a significant, not only at the national level, but especially here at Texas. And some of that has been mitigated by the fact we've had such population growth, over the last, 4 or 5 years when other states haven't. But we will run into that exact same issue going forward. So, if that's okay. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk really about laying the foundation for understanding the labor market at a more granular level than occupations and programs. Really talking about skills. I'm doing a white paper for the Department of Labor on skills and thinking about skills and organizing labor market information systems around a concept of skills. And in fact, I was at a conference call this morning talking about that, and the term marketable skills came up, not unlike what we're talking about here. And somebody on the line said, well, what's the opposite of a marketable skill? Is there an opposite to that? Are we teaching non-marketable skills in any way, shape, or form? And I thought it was a very interesting question, because as we go forward, there was a discussion starting with the German model. And we clearly are not Germany, and we're not starting from a place that is a German model. This quote from Dr. Salzman at Rutgers: the U.S. education and employment system is not designed to be tightly coupled as with other countries such as Germany, with highly prescribed career and education tracks. Instead, the U.S. has a fluid system in which career paths can be pursued through a range of disciplines and educational experiences. I'm not sure that any of us that have been through that higher education system would like to see it any different. But I think a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the labor market is there a way to improve the transparency and the focus of students going through that system so they get a better sense of what is going on, what is in demand in the labor market. So those are the issues that I really want to address here. Starting off with the question is, does more education make a difference from a labor market standpoint? And the answer is absolutely it does. Those people with more education have higher earnings across the board and lower unemployment rates. And that's been consistent for many, many years, continues to be consistent here in these 2013 data that's in your packet. The larger question, however, when we talk about skills and what are marketable skills is, are all education programs created equal in terms of the labor market? Now, one of the interesting things about are all programs being created equal or are created equal is how do we measure the value of an educational program? I'm going to go back to Dr. Salzman's quote, is aren't there liberal arts graduates that are picking up all kinds of marketable skills along the way? Just because we don't talk about them in terms of technical skills, aren't they picking up skills that are marketable in the labor market in lots of different environments? And the answer is, regardless of how we label a program, we know students are picking up marketable skills. But how we're communicating that, the transparency of that, how we communicate it to the student, how we match that up against what the employer needs, that's really what some of our issues are. Now let me go back a little bit about what you study does matter. Not only that you study matters, but what you study matters. I've got on this slide here some examples from 2013 and 2009 about the top highest paying post-exit majors and the bottom lowest paying majors for these two time periods, 2009 and 2013. You can see that there's a huge difference between those programs whose post-exit outcomes are highly compensated in the labor market. Again, we're assuming that highly compensated in the labor market is a proxy for demand, all right, which is fairly reasonable economic concept, but you know, it's still a foundation principle. You can also see the difference between some of the programs on the lower end. Now, for me, one of the interesting things was when you look at this 2013 data, the gap between the highest majors and the lowest majors was about $81,000. That's a pretty good sized gap. In 2009, that gap was roughly $66,000. So what we've seen just in the last 4 or 5 years is the labor market is really starting to value specific majors and the composite skill sets more than they are others. Many of us that are a little longer in the tooth might remember a day when our parents said, and the labor market said, just get a degree. If you get a degree, you're going to be fine. And indeed, the gap between different majors coming out of college was not all that wide. All right. As a matter of fact, I don't have any data with me, but that gap back in 1984 was somewhere around $34,000. So that you can see over time that labor market has continued to value certain majors more than others. We're talking about marketable skills here. Just a quick glance at some other high earning and low earning programs. These are for bachelor's degree programs here in Texas that have had 100 graduates or more. You can see that the range of the highest paying programs in the petroleum engineering graduates, 100,000. Chemical engineering, you'll see most of these engineering programs, as Dr. Paredes mentioned, some of the specific schools that are market-specific programs, professional programs, certainly have higher market rewards. And we see on the lower end some of the programs whose post-exit earnings are a little less. But the most important thing here is you see a very wide range of how the labor market is rewarding graduates from certain programs. I want to mention here the associate's degree, as I tag team with my colleague, Mr. Bettersworth, is that the highest earning associate degree programs, and some of these programs from a labor market standpoint, again, using post-exit earnings as the proxy for demand, are higher than a number of the 4-year college programs. Now, the recent College Measures study, and I know the coordinating board spent a lot of time working with the College Measures folks, also broke out not only associate's degrees, but the difference between academic and technical associate's degrees. And this is a chart from that particular study, and you can see that from a technical standpoint, on a 1-year post-exit basis, that those technical associate's degrees, again, from a labor market standpoint, appear to have a great deal of value, and certainly more value than other programs. Now, there's another way to look at that, and this particular chart, I call this Texas Earnings by Educational Attainment. This is the 25th percentile, the median, and the 75th percentile of earnings from the American Community Survey. And this is the educational level of employed workers in the state. And really what I want to point out here is when you start looking at the associate's, bachelor's, master's program, what you can see is there's those programs that are associate degree, or those workers who hold associate degrees, at the 75th percentile level, have post-exit earnings or have employed earnings that are as high or higher than 40% of the bachelor's degree programs. So does what you study matter? The answer is yes. The data say that it does. The data increasingly say that it matters more and more. And the question is, when we talk about marketable skills, what do those look like? Let me back up again real quick. How many of you have seen an occupational title lately, or a job title? Or I'm sure our TI folks can volunteer some job titles that, well, frankly, we'd say you couldn't explain to your mother. All right. What are the skill sets that underlie some of these job titles? Now, when I was at the Workforce Commission, we spent a lot of time with the Conference Board looking at their help wanted online job postings and the job titles. And I can tell you that we saw job titles in there I couldn't understand. And when I say couldn't understand, what that means is I know that business is looking for specific skill sets, but the job description, the way that it was written, didn't translate particularly well into what are they really looking for. Steve, it goes back to the whole issue of writing appropriate job descriptions and getting business to communicate to us what it is they're really looking for. And using occupational titles as the intermediary or the common language for that is getting increasingly difficult. This list of 20 job titles kind of gives an example of that. How many of you know what a chief listening officer is? Oh, and by the way, it's not your spouse, just in case you were curious about that. But interestingly, we have programs both across the university and the community college system that are providing the core skill sets for all of these occupational titles. It's that how we communicate that and how we understand that using just programs and occupational titles is getting very, very difficult for everybody, not the least of which for business. Now, here's another example of emerging occupational titles. Here's an example of an energy manager. Anybody, what program matches an energy manager? Anybody know? We don't really have a great idea, but here's an occupation increasingly in demand in this increasingly sustainable green environment that really is a combination of skill sets. So we're talking about marketable skill sets that perhaps have come from other typical business units, like a couple of skills from the human resources world in terms of trainer, a couple of skills from the sales and marketing, like marketing manager skills, or some skills from finance and accounting. What we've got now are emerging occupations whose composite skill sets are not accustomed to be trained together, but in fact are drawing from a number of different environments. This is the way the labor market increasingly is moving, is disparate skill sets being bundled for activities that don't match traditional program or labor market models. Now, when we talk specifically with employers, with business, and we say, okay, what is it that you're looking for? Here's the things that we consistently get. Businesses looking for people with good communication skills, the appropriate and necessary technical knowledge. Can you work with people who have a different age, race, and gender and education level than you? Do you have a can-do and pleasant attitude? Again, a lot of this, Larry, goes back to the issue of soft skills and social metrics, behavioral metrics. And number 5 here is critical thinking skills. And I think all of these are fairly consistent with what business wants. If we think that the education system should be more aligned with the needs of business, then we need to start thinking about not just the program or occupation level, but at the marketable skills level. And those marketable skills are not just what we call hard or technical skills. As a matter of fact, this may be the biggest challenge of this committee, is what the heck is a skill in the first place? So when I use the word skill as an economist, I have a tendency to think about hard technical skills. But if we all sat around and we used the word skill and asked each of us to define operationally what we thought was a skill, some of these words might pop up, like academic or technical competencies, specific tasks and duties that might be employer-specific or process-specific. We might talk about general talents and abilities. I was in Washington a couple of months ago and went to the Association of Professional Engineers. And the receptionist that greeted me had a plaque that was on her desk. And she had a job title. And the job title was Director of First Impressions. Are we training for that? I don't know. I was so curious, though, that I talked to the managing director and I said, "Where did you come up with that title, and what are the skills associated with it?" He said, "Well, it set the culture for our organization, part 1." I said, "It makes perfect sense to me. Now, what are the skills?" Anybody have any idea what those skills are? The number 1 skills are, this person has to be cheery and smile all the time. All right? Now, how many of us would use the word skills and cheery and smiling as the operational definition for skill? The answer is, he did, because that's the way he was thinking in terms of culture. The rack space people do, those rackers, they're looking for fit, they're looking for behavior and personality. There's a lot of businesses that are thinking about fit and culture as the primary skills that they're looking for. So these other examples here. Specific hiring requirements, skill objects, proficiencies, knowledge, personal traits, learning objects, abilities, academic credentials, industry certifications, workplace basics, on the job, or experience. Mature workers. That business loves to have somebody that has that maturity coming forward. Performance, mastery, general work activities, and the last two of these, detail work activities and general work activities, come from the ONET federal database I'm going to talk about in a minute. So the definition of skills, when we say marketable skills, what is it, what's the framework, and what's the operational definition that can be widely understood, I think is an important thing for us to consider. Now, let me bring to you a really simple, basic model to think about this. Again, just for your consideration. This, what I call the talent development model or personal talent development model, only has 4 tiers. Now, for those of you that are in business and industry, we think about competencies, competency models that are 8, 10 tiers deep. But I want to pose just a very simple model. It starts with core academics. With core academics, both in secondary and post-secondary level, you want people with critical thinking skills, but you want people who can read and write and do mathematics in a very core, basic way. But it's not just enough. In this competency model, what I'm proposing is another major important part of this is what I call workplace basics or soft skills. I go back to all the things that we've talked about here and that business keeps telling us is the ability to be committed to the workplace, to be able to work with others, leadership, followership skills, professional, all of these kinds of things. It's an important part of the employability model. The little purple section you have is what I call occupational skills or vocational competencies. These would be the technical skills that we talk about, that we think about in terms of performing specific jobs. And the last but not the least important one is there are certain jobs that are essentially firm-specific. They're process-specific, firm-specific. They only come when you're on the job with the employer and through experience. And the educational system can't deal with all of those things. And in fact, when I was at the Workforce Commission, we spent a lot of time talking about skills, and I had some naysayers that would say, you can't catalog all the skills that are in demand in the labor market. You can't take every business in the state and understand all of the skills that they're looking for. And I would say, no, you can't. But I think there is a core of skills that cross all of those businesses. Oh, and by the way, if business has somebody with strong academic background, with appropriate workplace basics, with the appropriate technical skills for the job that they're going to do, they're going to make an investment in that individual. All right? So the ability, understanding, and recognition to work with business, knowing full well that firms will do specific kind of skill training, gives you sort of a rounded 4-tier competency model. Now, what we're talking about here in this committee is workplace is essentially the technical skills. So how do we define technical skills? Do we even have a common language for understanding that? And I've been asked today to talk a little bit about something that we did at the Workforce Commission, started here in Texas. Interesting sometimes when you start looking for the best initiatives going on throughout the state and you want to look at California, New York, and Florida and these other places, sometimes you can look in your own backyard and see some very interesting things that are going on here. It was a project that was started at the Workforce Commission and now carried through in a lot of different places that we call the Detailed Work Activity Common Language Project. It's the need to create and understand or create an operational definition, a set of work activities that are transferable across a wide range of occupations and that can be understood when we say skills, that everybody in the room can be on the same on the same plane. When we say skills, we're talking about a specific kind of skill and has a specific, in this case, semantic definition. So we picked the domain that was in the ONET database, which is a detailed work activity. It's a domain in ONET. It's a little broader than a task statement. It's more specific than a competency statement, but essentially a DWA or work activity at its syntactic level matches very well with curriculum development and the development of competencies, educational competencies, which is one of the reasons it's such a valuable construct in developing curriculum. And last but not least, it does provide a common structure for skills. Now, we think that there are 3 major areas here for the application of a DWA Common Language Project. One is curriculum alignment, which is the #1 focus here, but also identifying regional skill gaps or individual company skill gaps, looking at skill composition or worker capabilities to job or hiring requirements, and then facilitating the labor exchange in a more efficient way. Now, this is, I think, my colleague, Mr. Bettersworth, is going to use this same slide, just a graphic, a visual, to talk about what we're trying to communicate here, which is Historically, we've been looking at trying to match up educational programs and occupations at occupational title levels and program levels. What if we can move that communication down a little lower? So essentially what we're doing is we're now getting to understand the labor market from a skill perspective and being able to match that directly to learning objectives and competencies on the educational side. And we don't lose, so that in that extra granularity, what we're picking up is more precision in curriculum development. Now, your state of Texas has already made some major investments down this same road using these same concepts. There is a Texas employer-validated detailed work activity library. It's got almost 2,500 skill statements in it. Texas Instruments was one of the companies that participated in the validation effort for it. There's another trailer or additional database that's associated with it, which is the performance level. So if you have a task statement, we also want to know, well, does the employer need to be able to perform that task at an entry level or an expert level? Makes a big difference. The educational system, in terms of both some higher education institutions and certainly your secondary career and technology education, have also bought into this concept. So we have translated all of the high school CTE TEKS into DWA so that they can have that same common language. And there's also a crosswalk that matches the Detailed Work Activity Common Language Project to SIP and WECM codes, all of which we use to categorize higher education activity. There is also what we call the Workplace Basics Framework. I mentioned that soft skills and the importance of soft skills in terms of personal employability. Well, we actually have a operational definition of workplace basics that includes some 30 soft skill or workplace basics statements. There is a database that has already been completed, at least a desktop validation, that has assigned workplace basics to each hard skill or DWA. Can you imagine not only being able to take a job and profile it based on the hard skills that are necessary, but also the soft skills or the social metrics and behaviors that are critical to the performance of those hard skills? That's where this workplace basics and DWA projects both come together. And you can see actually a manifestation of that at one of the Workforce Commission's online websites, which is texasskillstowork.com. And last but not least here, I want to transition this conversation over to how Texas State Technical Colleges has been moving forward, taking all of this and creating a center that Michael's now the executive director of, that is the Center for Educational Outcomes, C4EO, and moving all of this forward and trying to take this same framework and this progress that's been made and bring it into higher education as a whole. So with Matt, Michael, I'll let you take that over.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm all that stands between you and lunch. Okay. Thank you, Rich, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm with Texas State Technical College. As was mentioned earlier, I joined TSTC just coming up on 15 years ago. I came to TSTC from a place called IC Squared originally, which was founded by George Kosmetsky and largely focused on preserving prosperity and promoting prosperity in the U.S. and around the world. And the idea and the concept was predominantly that if we can connect individuals with skills and have successful companies, that at the time former Soviet countries would be likely to go back to the Soviet Union or communism. The idea was that individual liberty and freedom was closely tied towards financial independence. And so it was the idea of capitalism there, preserving liberty. Those are lofty ideals, which IC Squared were founded on. And to some degree, and to a large degree, those are some of the same ideals that guide TSTC. Our core principle, our core purpose is economic development. Not simply conferring degrees or enrollment, but it's economic development. When the institution was created 50 years ago in June this year. So today I'd like to focus on three core topics that resonate around that point. The first one will be on driving outcomes, and we'll talk a little bit about the new funding model at TSTC and some of the implications there. The second one, to echo what Rich was talking about, will be on aligning curriculum, and we'll show some specific examples of that. And the last one's going to be on what we call working smarter. And it's really talking about some of the examples of agile change, responding to industry demand in a new way. And the key focus of all of these things are on really sustainable changes, changes that are not just flash in the pan. Higher ed and education, to a large degree, we often become really focused on the latest panacea, the latest solution to everything. It's going to be project-based learning, or it's going to be this, or going to be that, or it's going to be MOOCs. And we focus a lot on these implementations or methods of delivery. And what we're really talking about is trying to fundamentally change culture and the structure of the organization, its business model, to focus on these ideas that matter most, namely getting more Texans placed in great-paying jobs. As I mentioned earlier, first focus is on driving outcomes. And pardon my voice right now, the cedar last month got me and is still hanging on a little bit. So thank you for providing the cough drop, Shirley. Thank you. The TSTC's new funding model is historically, we're funded on contact hours. Contact hours is the historic way that public higher education is funded in Texas. I should say it's funded that way, how it guides funding, how it guides our allocation process from the state. And the measure of contact hours focuses on enrollment. And so that structure drives the college to focus first and foremost on its enrollment. How many students do we have enrolled? Because that's going to drive our state appropriation. It also drives our local auxiliary funds with bookstores and tuition. We have residential campuses, so it also drives auxiliary funds in those areas. But employment is not our sole measure of success. If we're employing students in a program that is not having high outplacement outcomes, we're not fulfilling our mission of economic development. So the idea of this funding model is to fundamentally change the culture and focus of the college to focus first and foremost on the thing that we're designed for, which is earnings, placement. Not just initial earnings, but placement over the long term. We want to see progression in those earnings. So the way this model works, which was developed with the coordinating board, the comptroller's office, governor's office, LBB staff, Ray Marshall Center at UT, and others, and Rich, is to look at the earnings of our students after they leave over a 5-year period and determine is that amount going up or going down, and use that to drive and gauge our funding process. Are we increasing the number of people placed in earnings, or are we not? And specifically, that causes us to focus a lot on our program mix and our alignment of our competencies. This is a large amount of our budget. TSTC's last year's budget, 38% of our budget came from the A&I portion of the state appropriations. The majority of that 38% is based historically on contact hours, and we've now shifted that to where that percentage is based on the earnings of our students when they leave. So it really gets a lot of our campus's attention, to say the least. But this is less about funding. As I said before, it's more about culture. When we make the incentive about enrollment, our campuses and programs naturally trace enrollment. We focus on starting new programs based on what's going to have a large market demand, not necessarily focused on what has the most industry demand. And that's the reality. That's the structure of that incentive program. This model says, wait, where can we maximize our placement and earnings first and foremost? Which programs do we have, or do other colleges or other institutions have in the state or country that are seeing the highest earnings reflective of market demand, where we should be looking to start or tune? Similarly, if we have a program that's earnings are not the highest compared to the benchmarks in the state, that's a clue that we have a quality issue. Maybe we're not focusing on all the right skills that are needed, or maybe we don't have the right industry partners at the table. So by changing that finance model, we change the whole organization's culture to focus on those kinds of metrics first and foremost. The implications, that's the wrong computer, this one. The implications have been quite stark. We've had a 60% increase in the combined earnings of our graduating cohort. This is where we take the entire cohort of students and look at their combined earnings. A large portion of this is due to the surge in enrollment we saw due to the recession. But there's some increasing percentage that's due towards the quality of placement. So some other numbers, we've had a 60% increase in combined earnings. We've had a 32% increase in the number of graduates. This is over 09 and 12. And a 36% increase in the number found working in Texas. And an 18% increase in the average starting pay. So those are the kinds of metrics that we want to see happening, not just enrollment growth. And they're very encouraging. It's really early on in this model. We're moving in a battleship in a new direction. But pretty stark changes already starting to happen in the organization. I'll give some specific examples in a second. One of the data tools that we use to gauge our employment and outcomes is the gainful employment data produced by the coordinating board. Let me back this up and try it one more time, see if that plays. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is gainful employment data. This uses the Workforce Commission's unemployment insurance wage data to output earnings and found working by 6-digit SIP. Very specific. It's for the whole state of Texas. We've taken that data and made it accessible in other ways, as the Workforce Commission and Coordinating Board has as well. My point is, these kinds of performance outcomes metrics are critical for us to be able to gauge how we're doing with our employability output. We as a business, as a college, don't have the ability to generate these kinds of record linkages statewide. Historically, and I think the coordinating board is working to grow their resources in this area. And as a receiver and customer of that data, we are very supportive of that. We would really like to see more data and more clarity, because it's very valuable. This is an example of a website that we've created using this data at our C4EO website. You can go there today, c4eo.org. And this looks at that same earnings data and enables us to look at, say, one of our colleges. In this example, I'm going to pull up our TSTC. Oh, it stops playing every so. Look at that. Well, we'll show it to you later. This enables us to look at all of our campuses, as well as any other public higher education institution in the state, and look at our earnings outcomes over a 5-year period. Can you click? Oh, it's just, yeah, that's fine. I'll show it to you later at lunch. So, for example, if we see that our welding program doesn't have the highest earnings and another college does, well, is that due to their industry mix? Do they have different curriculum that they're teaching? A different group of employers they're working with? How can we maximize our employability? Now, if we see a program that statewide has low earnings, we know that target occupation may have less relevance in our labor market today. Why are we offering that program? Or do we need to deactivate the program? Do we need to retune it and adjust it in another direction? So these kinds of employability outcome metrics enable us to do that kind of benchmarking, which we've never been able to do in the past. And it's made possible by the Workforce Commission and Coordinating Board making this data available. We use that data, as I've alluded to align curriculum. When we're aligning curriculum, we want to focus on 3 core things, most of all. One, is there sufficient demand for this target occupation in the Texas economy? 2, is there sufficient growth? And 3, what do the earnings look like? Not just starting, but afterwards. There are some occupations where we have almost structural limitations in the state. We have shortages in nursing, shortages in welding, and some of these programs that remain fairly stable in their demand. Then there are other areas, oil and gas related, for example, at the moment, that can see shifts, spike and declines in growth. So because of the model, we're much more apt now to maybe cap our enrollment in wind turbine programs while they work on the production tax credit, and we see a decline in the number of new turbines. Then they fix that, and we see an increase in the building of new turbines. So we're looking at those supply and demand gaps, and then we're governing our input of those so we can maximize the employability output. If we saturate the market, oversaturate, we're going to see our earnings decline in a region. Again, so this is an example of focusing on target occupations. TSTC has 11 locations around the state. We've seen a lot of growth recently due not only to HB5 from ISDs requesting support for pathways of study and marketable skills, but we've also seen increased demand as our economy has recovered, particularly in the corridor, the I-35, 10, et cetera corridor. So we're responding to that demand, and it's expensive business, as you know. So we're very hopeful with this next legislative session and the comptroller's estimates that we'll see some reinvestment into these areas. Other states are taking note and investing deeply into these types of fields. California, in 2013 and 14, $500 million invested into their career and technical education for their state. Over 120 community colleges, $500 million invested in California specifically to increase their workforce programs. And it's a competitive, I have a parochial interest in this, obviously, given my institution, but there's a competitive battle in these workforce spaces, and responding to that growth and demand is something that we hope to see happen this session. And we're encouraged by it. So I've alluded, we use a lot of this data for benchmarking and tuning regionally to target occupations. And at the core level, let's say that we have a target occupation that we know is relevant in terms of its earnings, growth, and demand. Now the key is, or do we have the right skills? Are we aligning at the competency level appropriately? The second one is, are we working with the right industry partners? As an aside, and I'll get to industry partners in a second. So on skill alignment, we're using the competency library that the Workforce Commission created, and we've expanded it. We've expanded it to include not only hard skills, but soft skills. You saw this chart earlier. Historically, when we do program development, we focus on a program to a target occupation. This works really well when we're talking about nursing or a pilot or something that deals with licensure, where we have a real consistency in the skill sets that's required. But when I get into, say, even a welding program, there are vastly different welding skills needed on the coast in Port Isabel than there are in Amarillo, believe it or not. One is you're going to have scuba certification in Port Isabel, probably not in Amarillo. And there are other variations that we find even within the same industry and same occupation. A machinist at Lockheed versus a machinist at Bell Helicopter. Same industry, aerospace, NAICS code. Same occupation, SOC code, machinist. Different skill sets requirements at a finite level. Bell Helicopter wants angle grinding. It's a very specific skill set for a machinist to do, very hard. It's for the rotor gear in the tail of a helicopter, that angled large gear. Lockheed, they want their machinists being very familiar with autoclaves and how to get these things for radar absorption and working on the F-35. Machinists that are much more concerned in a different skill set. So here we have a variation in the skills, even at the same job title. So what that means, if our goal is to maximize employability, we have to look at the DNA of those occupations, at their skills. We have to look at the skill variations within regions and occupations and industries, and then maximize and tune our curriculum as best we can. In the end, by the way, we as administrators aren't going to do that. Our expert faculty are going to do that. So that means we have to make that information easily accessible to our mid-management and to our front line, to our instructors, and then give them the freedom to change and modify as they need to. So we're crosswalking now at a skill level. This is an example, Steve, you mentioned earlier, Mr. Lyle, about soft skills and hard skills, workplace basics. What we've done is we've taken the over more than 850 occupational profiles of hard skills represented in these colored boxes at the bottom. And we've now, with support from the Workforce Commission, modeled all of the soft skills, or workplace basics, that are attached to those. This is the first time that we know about where we've quantified, somebody's quantified, what are the workplace basics and how they vary by occupation, because they do. This is a CEO. Leadership, oral communication, critical thinking are the top workplace basics. This is a carpenter. Attention to detail. Measure twice, cut once. One trip to Home Depot, not 5. Okay. So by making these kinds of information more available to our instruction and faculty and designers, we can be able to teach more overtly. We do this naturally. A good instructor in a carpentry program is going to teach the importance of attention to detail time and time again. Safety in some of these other areas. They're inherently taught. But what we're trying to do and doing is bringing objectivity to that so we can be more overt in our design and measurement of it. So we can give National Instrument assessment of not only the competencies and degree of mastery of their hard skills, but also their workplace basics. So that's where we're moving. This is a dietitian, for example. Oral communication is the top workplace basic because you're talking to people all the time. So the importance of a dietitian that's able to communicate effectively. And that seems obvious when we think about it. But when you're just working on what's involved in nutrition, it could be very easy to overstep that and focus on diet and purely the science of it. So those are examples of how we're using the common skills language, and we're making these tools available not just to our college, but to the whole country through the C4EO initiative. And we'll have some announcements in March about that. The last one is working smarter. The contact hour model before is also very focused on a semester credit hour and on a linear delivery of instruction. I need you to enroll in a class, and if I have something like, say, instrumentation, so it's our highest paying award right now. The average starting pay last year was $80,000 for a degree that costs less than $10,000. It takes 2 years. But it takes 2 years to do that program. And the reason is that we structure it by semester and by course in this rigid structure. And we only offer some courses every other year because of the lab demand and other things like that. So that limits our ability. If we have somebody that's underemployed, maybe we have somebody that already has an engineering degree, which we've had happen, come in and want to get an instrumentation degree. They have to take 2 years. We can do prior learning assessment, but we only offer the course in that structure. So the goal of competency-based learning, now that we're freed from the contact hour model, is to bring prior learning assessment and uncouple the skills from the course structure and offer them in a program of study at the pace that that individual person needs that instruction. It's very time-consuming and expensive to unpack, as you can imagine, 50 years and hundreds of years of history of offering structures that way. But we've just received approval from the Department of Education, the fourth institution in the country that we know of, to have federal financial aid available for competency-based instruction. That was a real linchpin. So we've got at a state level with the approval of the funding model, and now at a federal level, real momentum in that organizational change flywheel to move in that direction. And the key to that is answering and serving students. We have students of all ages, not just high school students. We have older students, returning veterans, people that are underemployed that already have degrees or already have a lot of OJT, on-the-job training, that we want to be able to quickly assess and then spot fill with the competencies that are needed. The most expensive thing for a student is not tuition, in most cases, unless you're going to Baylor or I went or Harvard, it's pretty expensive. Those things can be pretty high. It's lost wages. Lost wages, deferred income. Every year that you're not working, the compound effect on that person's livelihood is huge. So if we can shorten the time and focus on the skills that matter most, the long-term economic benefits are quite dramatic. It is not less expensive to offer training that way, by the way, just because it takes a shorter amount of time. We have to have more instructors, more labs, more flexibility. But if we can turn greater output and produce more earnings and placement, then we hope that our model will generate the business sense that makes that work. Before getting to the last point, reiterating, a big part of this, as Rich has mentioned, is changing the understanding. People don't know what an instrumentation degree is, or an instrumentation technician. And a lot of people don't know that there are these jobs and opportunities available. It was alluded to earlier by Eva that we've lost respect for a lot of careers in the country. Mike Rowe talks about declaring war on work. And it's part of our popular culture where we make a lot of educational opportunities consolation prizes. We look at them that way. And we think of a lot of careers as consolation prizes. An example is a plumber. Mike Rowe points out every time a plumber is portrayed in a movie or television, they're usually a butt of a joke, pun intended. Right? I was mentioned earlier about, quit your job and be a plumber. And there's a joke about an attorney who has a leak in his bathroom while he's getting ready in the morning and water is spraying uncontrollably. So he calls a plumber. The plumber shows up and walks in and goes to the house and he fixes it and gets it ready and hands him a bill. And the lawyer looks at the bill and says, that's like $400 an hour. That's more than I charge as an attorney. And the plumber says, hey, so what I used to say when I was an attorney. and then he goes outside and gets in the brand new F-350 that's out there. So we're starting to see a shift in the public perception and popular culture around these ideas. I think it's a healthy move in a new direction. Matt Crawford published a book, Shop Class is Soulcraft, and he says that we have a diversity of disposition, a greater appreciation for the diversity of individual disposition, what those talents and skills are. And they vary and they're different. They may be different from our own personal experience. And so I'm encouraged by that. And there's greater data that's helping make people make more informed choices. We don't want to force or ever force a choice. But if we can give parents, students, teachers, counselors greater information and transparency about what's out there, and then let the market move in that direction. So we're encouraged by that. Last point. A lot of this is changing how we're engaging with industry. I'll make a specific example here of a colleague of mine. This is Edgar Padilla. Edgar Padilla is the Director of Career Services for TSTC. He doesn't like to call it the placement office, but that's what we functionally, his job is to get a lot of our people employed. My chancellor would say that's actually all of our jobs. It's not just Edgar's. It's a good point. I just reminded myself of. Edgar runs the career fairs, though, and he was running a career fair the traditional way that we had for probably decades. And that was we would send out a notice to all of our industry advisors in the community. We're having a career fair, industry. Please come. Bring your table, set up. We only have 85 spots at this one, so first come, first serve. What would happen? Well, we'd get some industry that we're actively hiring, absolutely. We'd also get some other colleges, maybe some other institutions that wanted to recruit our students. That's not our mission. And then we had some industry that maybe they just always come to the job fair and they like seeing some old buddies, and going out later. Well, that's not in the best interest of our students to just do a first come, first served career fair. So Edgar, on his own, said, no, the career fair is invite only. And he used Wanted Analytics and other tools. First, he asked all of our faculty who is actively hiring. And how we did that is we have a job site tool where industry goes and they post thousands of job postings on our website to hire our students. And we use those job postings to connect with resumes. So who was actively engaging with the college? Okay, first come, there's a first cut. Faculty, who did we miss? And then second, we use online data tools to mine who are the employers in Texas that are actively hiring. We found people we'd never known about, and they had never known about us. Then we start looking at who's paying the most, who has progression plans, who has tuition reimbursement. Because we want to look at not just high-earning employers, we want to look at placing our students with high-quality employers. So there's competition to the employer market there. We're a talent broker in this model. And our inherent interest is serving the needs of industry, but also maximizing the earnings of the students. And that's a competitive interest that's there. So this is an example of how when the industry came, invite only. Oh, and by the way, Edgar made the industry pay to be there. Not first come, first serve. It was pay to play. Historically, we used to give out, with students' permission, a book of resumes for our current class and just give them out. Giving away talent for free, right? We're wising up to that. We're maximizing our earnings and output potential, and we're helping a lot of employers offer and do those kinds of incentives that are in the best interest of all of us. Helps with retention, does lots of great things. So this is that team and replicating that around the state. I reiterated this chart that Rich, you already saw. I kept it in there, and we were on the same page, so I won't cover that one again. Lastly, all of this signifies a shift predominantly from focusing on activity, metrics of activity, to metrics of outcomes. The historic model of measuring enrollments and contact hours and graduates and these things, now our first and foremost entry is on placement, earnings. How satisfied is that individual with the job and career they're in, with the employer? So we'll start to see some post-exit surveys to our industry partners where you'll see, we said that this graduate knew these competencies, hard and soft. How well do they actually know them? So we can do some reverse 360 feedbacks to tune and optimize our curriculum. What's the return on investment to us, to the taxpayer that's paying for this? How efficient are we? So those are the kind of metrics that aren't necessarily the most common for a higher ed public institution that are now at the forefront of our institutional effectiveness metrics. We're still looking at all the other ones too, don't get me wrong. But these are the ones that are leading the page. So with that, we'll take more comment and discussion. Thank you very much.
Michael, let me lead off. Telling us how many students does the Texas State Technical College system have, and what about your completion rates for year 1 and 2 in your programs?
Sure. Our current enrollment is just over 15,000. That varies between 15 and 20. We've seen a decline in enrollment, as most of higher ed has seen, as the recession has receded and the economy's improved. So we're pretty small. That said, we graduate more engineering technicians than anybody in the state, and we're number 2 in the country. So we're small, but we're very focused on the technical side. Our completion rates, do you know those offhand? we can look those up for you right here because the expert in these data sets are right there. They're unusually high for our sector, largely because, one, our students come with the purpose of getting a job to get a skill, not just to pick up credits and transfer. So the intent of the student is completion and job creation. So we have unusually high graduation rates compared to the two-year sector because our student intent is very focused. Secondly, we're mostly residential. So most of us have a higher percentage of full-time students. So I like to celebrate our completion rate as the graduation rate's coming up here. It's pretty good. It can be better. So anyway, I'm giving you time. The other component is we are an open enrollment institution also. So because of that, our doors are open. If you have your GED and you can come in, you're open into the college. Our programs are more selective. Nursing, for example, there's some criteria. Pilots, there's some criteria that are there.
Statewide.
Okay, we're working on it. We'll get it to you.
Okay. So I'd like to open it up to committee for Michael and for Richard to ask them questions. Yeah.
If I could, one more on that point, I'm sorry. In this model, graduation rate is not necessarily our most important metric. If they graduate and they don't get a job, we didn't do our job. So it's really, what is our placement rate is the metric we're trying to get. What is your placement rate for our campuses to get competition there? Secondly, we have a lot of leavers, people that come in and stop out. By the nature of an open enrollment institution, that's going to happen. But in this model, if they do 9 semester credit hours, they're included in their funding model. So we're very focused on exiters. When they leave the door, can we get them a job? Can we get them a part? What can we do with those exiters now? So why our graduation rate's important, there's a 20-30% bump in earnings when they graduate. That found working and placement rate is one we want to really focus on.
I wondered why you used the word exiters versus completers.
Yes.
And that's the reason why.
Correct.
Yeah.
If we only did the funding model on completers, we would have to become highly selective and cream the crop of our programs. And that is not what our institution's about. We're open enrollment. But we also just can't let somebody walk in, register for a class, and be in the model. So we did 9 semester credit hours as the minimum they have to obtain. And that's, we're packaging marketable skills achievement awards, MSAs, on the front end. So that if somebody does exit out, we can get them that much faster to leaving, at least with some measure of that piece of paper.
And in a skills-based model, a terminal degree or completion, a certificate, is an important thing, but it's not the only thing. And if you've got people that have picked up the core skills that it adds to their employability and they end up with a positive outcome, indeed, higher education has achieved its goal, according to this model.
Bernie?
Our 6-year rate's 35.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you, Woody. Appreciate it. I'll start with a couple disclaimers. I love Richard because I served on the North Central Texas Workforce Board for too long. And I love Michael because a million years ago I chaired his wonderful system, the Board of Regents for his system. There's icing on the cake that I think you left out, and that was, could you share with us the student diversity?
It's our student diversity. It varies dramatically by campus. Our valley campuses have a higher Hispanic rate, and then they change around the state. It has been our diversity on ethnicity is broad, and it's so broad organically that it's not even something that we super focus on. Our diversity by gender is our biggest gap, and that is we want most of our women focus in dental and healthcare areas, nursing, things like that. Although we did have a valedictorian from Montana come and lead our welding program and kick everyone's tail in that program. So that's where our main demography disparity is in gender in some of these more traditionally male programs.
Back when you were 30-some-odd% minority, are you anywhere near that today?
34% African American and Hispanic.
Wow.
At Waco. It's at Waco. Male is 79.5.
Sure.
Go to Harlingen. What's that one?
This Marshall.
I should also mention we're moving to a single accreditation this year, so all of these things will be in one metric next time we do this.
Yeah. In Harlingen, it's 90% Hispanic, but it's about 50-50 male female.
Yeah.
You got a big healthcare concentration.
And our Harlingen campus is the only one that offers the academic core, and the reason for that is that we're the main higher ed game in that town. So the university center, Dr. Maldonado, who's here, just stepped out, helped create that. So we have a high transfer percentage at the Harlingen location, which explains our higher female balance.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then Larry.
Okay, great. Just a couple of comments and then a question. First, I very much enjoyed the presentation. You should take this show on the road. Maybe call it the Mike and Rick show or something.
We'll be at South by in March.
The humor that you brought to a very dry subject, I applaud you. The second comment is really, as Rich alluded to, TI participated in the formation of the library, basically the skill sets that we look for and what that translates into. It was probably one of the best exercises that we've been through as a company. We get asked all the time to participate in things like this. And what is really wonderful to see with this is that it went somewhere. It's actually being used. And because we get wrapped up into the titles and we confuse educators, and this really adds a lot of clarity. And so just to really applaud the efforts. The question is, and it relates back to getting asked quite frequently, to participate in various ISDs, from a high school perspective, what should we be doing as secondary educators to prepare high school students? Because not everyone will go to college and that type of a thing. And so they're trying to, some ISDs that, and they don't need to be mentioned, not necessarily in Texas, but in California and others. And I'm like, it seems like this work could be leveraged with those ISDs. Maybe it is in Texas, but just as early as last year, it was evident that it's not. So how is that being done? How do we get the word out about that this rigorous work was done?
You know, we'll tag team this one too, but the detailed work activity process was very well received at TEA, and in fact, they followed up with some contracts to the Workforce Commission to do the translation between the DWA library and the Career and Technology Education TEKS, because there's a very strong emphasis over there to be able to say, are we indeed at the CTE course level? Are we offering the kinds of courses and the skills within those courses, the competencies within those courses that are addressing the needs of business? So they really are trying to make an effort to get those CTE courses specifically better aligned with industry needs. And so they have bought in pretty significantly the DWA effort. Almost more importantly, if you will, is their focus on the workplace basics projects. They think, based on their conversations with the business community, that these soft skill areas is the one thing that they have not been focusing on, have not been doing particularly well, but they really want to do it well. And so they made the investment to fund half of the Workplace Basics project that was eventually contracted to TSTC for the desktop alignment, if you will, of assigning Workplace Basics to each DWA. They funded the framework and the underlying research to be able to do that data collection side. They have also funded the development of 10 or 12 competencies for each one of those workplace basics so that they could literally take them and embed them in whatever topical course was going to be taught, that the appropriate workplace basics for the occupations that course was supposed to address are embedded in that coursework. So the secondary education has been making some pretty major both financial and intellectual commitments to being able to better align CTE coursework both on the soft skill and on the hard skill side.
So 3 quick points on that. the work that you did in contributing with NI and 4,000 industry members and 1,400 SMEs validated has been applied with the coordinating board's funding to align over 1,000 courses so far, more than 22 colleges, and more than 40 degrees programs. So we're expanding that using Perkins funding to operationalize that data with tools. That's the key. We've got the data. Now we need to make it available in the market for tools. The second thing we're doing is we put an LAR in for the Center for Employability Outcomes to do sustainable funding for that work. We've been strapping by on grants and contracts and other things and proving it out. Now we're actually going for sustainable funding. The third point of that is we hope to then be able to come back and say we don't need that funding anymore, because for it to truly be sustainable, we're going to license some of those things for commercial use. And that's our intention, to really make sustainable innovation along these things. I've been doing this long enough that we see a wave come, and we have funding go to something, and then the funding goes away and the initiative goes away. And it's a flash in the pan. Or political winds change and the funding goes away. So the way that we're going to make that most applicable is through sustainable innovation, and with both commercialization and probably some membership. We're talking about a new 501, like an IEEE for those standards, with some industry members. So I think that's going to be the key for us to really having sustainable ongoing application of that work. We're not looking at parochially as a TSTC college. We're going to bring that out nationally to do that. And it'll probably pop out of the college at some point if we're successful.
But Michael used the word tools, which we think is very important, because what we don't want is the business community to have to align what they're doing into standard federal coding systems and little round pegs and square boxes. If you've got a cybersecurity defense specialist programmer position and you've got a reasonable description of what the kind of skill sets that you're looking, we want to be able to take that language, take your language, your job description language, use natural language processing techniques and other big data tools to be able to say, okay, let's break that down into a common language skill set, and we'll see how that maps into education, both to help education be responsive to those skill needs, but to also help you as industry better understand how you're communicating your skill needs, what you're looking for, help you refine that, and then help get better alignment with the educational community. So we're trying to take advantage of some of these leading edge natural language processing tools to be able to speak your language regardless of what the job titles are, without you having to fit back into the government structure.
And you mentioned the roadshow. March at South by is when we're nationally going to be announcing some of those tools together. And bringing them out towards the market. We've been working feverishly to get ready for that. There's going to be an API and an engine. What we want to do is not build just proprietary tools. We want to make an engine and tools that when you write your job postings, or someone writes a resume, or someone writes curriculum, they can write it in a more specific, tuned, aligned manner.
Thank you for that. Really, the more basic question, or my concern, is that if you look at and again, I'm thinking about school districts that we care a lot about in Texas, DISD, Richardson Independent School District, Plano Independent School District, there's several others, that the work that's been done here, that when you go into those school districts, that you hear the same language. And as early as last year, I don't. And so all this great work must somehow make a difference in secondary education.
Yes.
It's too late when you get to higher ed to start talking about this.
So we provide the TEA on their writing teams, and they're working on a new oil and gas curriculum and 4 courses. And so we've given them the whole DWA analysis for oil and gas and all those jobs, so they can fold that into their curriculum. So we're doing it kind of one-off, with our relationships with the TEA, who's been great. If we're really successful, we'll then be able to make some tools that enable them to operationalize those into their curriculum writing tools on an ongoing, sustainable basis, so that when we're gone, those things are still going. That's our goal.
David?
I asked Rex to come up because we have a request into the legislature that addresses part of what Steve just mentioned potentially in terms of programs of study, and if Rex could at least say something briefly about that.
What we're looking at doing is expanding on some work that has already been done by Achieve Texas, which looked at aligning a lot of secondary education, but also to align the high school work with at least the first 2 years, and this is particularly relevant to career and technical education, certificates, and associate of applied science degrees. But to make sure that there's some alignment, and this dovetails nicely with House Bill 5 in the work that it does with, or the requirements that it has for career and technical endorsements at the secondary level. But to go back to your point is to try to align the curriculum that exists at the high school level so that a student can go through high school and then move right into and use some of that as dual credit perhaps, but then move right into and have a clear pathway to move right into a certificate program or a 2-year associate of applied science degree that leads into immediate employment. And a part of that structure that we're going to be looking at is the detailed work activities along with curriculum, and so to try to match all that up.
Larry, and then Terry.
I too was impressed with your analytical and detailed approach and appreciate the presentation. I have a question about one of your bubble charts, Michael, the one on dietitian and nutritionist. Is it possible to put that back up? If it's not, we can just look at the one that's on people's printed copies. But if I look at the bubble chart, I think it's coming up here. That's it. As I look at the bubble chart, I'd like to get a better sense of how you're going about this. If I'm going to be a dietitian, I actually have to know something about dietetics, right? Yes. Where is that? It looks like these bubbles are about skills. Is there another component of the educational experience that content knowledge, and that's elsewhere?
Yeah. So I'll start and then jump in. What this chart is showing on that top is the response to Mr. Lyle about the soft skills or workplace basics, and below that, which is it's not very clearly it's explained, you can't read it very clearly there in my chart, are all the hard skills, and where we get into the more specifics around those things. So the level of analysis that we're doing at this DWA and soft skill is just above the detailed task work. Rich, you want to give a bit more?
I would send you back to the original, or to the talent development model that I put up, the little 4-tiered model. All right, so you've got some core knowledges for a dietitian. You've got some core academic knowledges that are critical in the preparation of that worker. But you've also got 2 additional components there in that model. Well, actually, you've got 3 additional components. You've got the one that is these workplace basics that this particular database is trying to communicate. Then you've got the hard technical skills of the actual work activities that are traditionally performed by people in that profession. And then you've got that 4th tier, which is the experience/firm-specific kinds of knowledges based on particular business practices and the like of that individual. So in a 4-tier competency model, this is really only trying to get at one dimension or one domain of the overall preparation for, in this case, a dietitian.
Below this level would be tasks and activities that get very granular and specific. These help inform those.
But what I'm trying to get a sense of is how you're going about this. I mean, a student comes in, a student's going to take a curriculum that leads to dietitian, right?
Sure, yes.
Okay, and then you have to get, what you're doing is you're trying to put those skills consciously into their experiences, coursework and labs and whatever else they do.
Right.
While they're also developing content knowledge at the same time in those same kind of courses.
Exactly. And what we've historically thought about, I mean, in the general public, is that we have hard skills that are only taught. In a technical program, you only teach hard skills and competencies, and that soft skills or workplace basics, you only learn those in some other kind of program. And what we're saying is, that's not the case at all. We teach a lot of these workplace basics in a dietitian program or a welding program or a machining program. What we're doing is increasing the awareness of those workplace basics. Yeah. The hope being that now we can more overtly assess them in our curriculum and more consciously teach to them. Why is it important that you're an effective team member? Why is it important that you have effective critical thinking or problem sensitivity skills? Not that it's just something amorphous that you either pick up or don't. That's really kind of where we're evolving our design.
In essence, trying to make them more overt within the curriculum.
Right.
When we first started Workplace Basics, we got a lot of arguments where people said, oh, heck, the kids get that at home. I mean, that's the stuff that your parents are supposed to teach you and your mentors teach you. You don't need to, embed any of that in the public education system. And then once that argument surfaced, people said, well, wait a second, they don't get it at home. All right, they're not getting it at home. At some point in time, we have to imbue curricula at all levels with some of these soft skill kinds of things. But how do we operationally understand that and make it more overt within a given curriculum? And that's what this effort is trying to do.
And it appears that if you read this, and I'm glad you asked this question because I was wondering the same thing, but there is some overlap between the two as well. So if you look at the oral communications and you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you talk about make presentations and so I think the colors have some relationship as well too. These things in the middle relate really to the organization in terms of the soft skills, it appears.
Yes.
Right? So,
yeah, what we've done is we took the more than 850 occupational hard skill profiles, which we got those bottom things, and then we modeled the soft skills. To each one, we attached what the soft skill was, and that enables us to do this composite. We can talk in much more detail and show you. This is, by the way, an internal data visualization we just use for our data scientists. This is not a public view. We can get into some more detail with that offline if anybody's interested. It's very exciting. We've deployed it, as I said, 1,000 courses, 22 different colleges, and the feedback has been very encouraging. How we typically do a curriculum is we have a group like this of industry around the table, and we say, what does this person need to do? And they debate. Or maybe the faculty member talks most of the time, and then you have lunch, and they tell you what they're changing the curriculum, and you talk a little. The quality of industry advisory committees varies dramatically, as you can attest from being parts of them probably. What we're trying to do is bring objectivity to those discussions, analyzing the job postings of specific companies, giving profiles, and getting the politics out of what should be taught and looking at objective data on it.
Can I add also that this, what you're seeing here in terms of these Workplace Basics, is the first desktop assignment of a Workplace Basic to detailed work activities to allow us to even create this as a bubble chart visualization. And TSTC is in the process, the center is in the process of now doing external validation with the business community to say, this is what we see using industrial psychology kinds of tools and principles. Does it make intuitive sense to you? Is this really what you would like to see people in these particular occupations, the soft skills that you do indeed value? So we're in the process, just like we did many years ago with the detailed work activities, is going through a validation exercise of these Workplace Basic assignments.
So, Steve, we're glad you liked the first survey. You're getting a second one.
Speaking of lunch, we've got time for one more question, and we're running a little bit behind. So, Jerry?
Yeah, my question was, I admire what you're doing and what you're trying to do. I mean, this is fantastic. But my question would be, what can traditional community colleges learn from your experience? I do know there is some competition, between, particularly in areas where you have campuses, where and community colleges have areas, So how would you work together with community colleges in order to disseminate this knowledge with those community colleges and to share with them kind of your thinking, because some of them aren't as far along as you are, but again, there's competition too, for some of the students in some of the areas.
So TSTC, we're not a community college. We're really a state agent. We're a state agency. So we're a service provider to community colleges and ISDs. We get a lot more competition probably from our proprietaries than we do from our community colleges. So we have lots of partnerships. I mentioned we've already done this with 22 colleges. Only 4 of those are TSTC. The rest of those are other colleges. And Alamo, I'm looking at my list here, Temple, Navarro, Brookhaven, Grayson, El Paso, Austin Community College. And we're working with a bunch more this year. The coordinating board is supporting that work with Perkins Leadership money. And so we're paying for curriculum analysis, and then our goal is to operationalize those things so we can make them sustainable. We'd love to be able to license this technology to other corporate use and then make the educational tools free. That's our kind of business model that we're pursuing. So we're already actively engaging with Texas colleges and frankly outside of the state as well, where we hope to generate more revenue outside the state to bring in.
Thank you very much. And we need to break for lunch. Bring your meal back to the table, and we will continue and stay on track to finish by 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Mike, is Red Oak open?
Yes, Red Oak is open, and then we've got a new one announced in Fort Bend.
November conference workshops on the 21st of November. And given that our focus this morning has been on the marketable skills goal and the potential targets and strategies developed so far, we'll begin with that goal, and we'll spend most of our time on that goal. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Grossman Ginger to lead the way.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I, too, am surviving on lozenges, so I apologize for any inconvenience. I wanted to bring up a slide we looked at a few months ago where internally we tried to come up with a definition of marketable skills, because that was part of the discussion this morning. Is even though when we talk about marketable skills it seems intuitive, but it's actually can be a difficult concept to wrap our heads around, because when we're talking about it, we are talking about both soft skills and applied skills. And applied can mean those technical skills. They can mean the content-oriented skills that they were just talking about. But it is something that we're working towards having a better definition. I think we have a good start here, but we'd certainly be interested in your feedback on improving this. One of the things we noticed at the Leadership Council was that the marketable skills goal is really the only goal that isn't laden with numbers. There's not the outcomes or the targets are not filled with percentages or counts of students, and yet it is one of the hardest. It's sort of the hardest goal to help people understand, because again, we all come to the table with what we think we mean by marketable skills, and then the idea of how will we accomplish this goal. And so the targets are laid out in a way where we want to roll it out over time. One of the questions that came up was, okay, someone attended our breakout session and said, I understand you're rolling this out over time. How are you going to know that institutions have actually done these activities? How are you going to know that they've met these targets? And that is a very good question. So we've been talking about how we might do that. And really, this will have to be based on self-report by institutions. And we're thinking of a way to integrate this either into, say, our accountability system, or maybe our program inventory, but in some way leveraging a data system that already exists and incorporating that this reporting into that. Because those are data systems that already have the capacity for institutions to input data already. If you'll look at your form for the goals, you'll notice that on the marketable skills page, there are a few things in gray. And these are additions based on the Leadership Council and the feedback we got from that. We added back in a target. This was actually the original goal that we proposed that as a committee and as staff, we decided ultimately wasn't the best thing to be our goal, but we wanted to work it in as a target. And I think it was timely for us to work it back in, because the Senate Higher Education Committee made a suggestion that we have a target that looks at this, and so we do. Essentially, it's a maintenance goal. By 2030, at least 80% of students will be found working or enrolled within 1 year of earning a degree or certificate. And so again, this will be focused on students that we can find through our UI data. And those will be people who are working who stayed in Texas and who are working in Texas. We are hopeful that in the future, in past meetings, Dr. Gardner has mentioned, we might have other resources for identifying people who leave our state after they finish a degree program here. We are hopeful those things will come to fruition, but currently all we have are Texas data. So that is one change we've made, adding that back in as a target. In the strategies, the workforce development boards were added into the first strategy. That was a suggestion made by someone at the leadership conference. And that's an important addition, because that's not something we had talked about earlier among staff. And the very last strategy, number 6, we talked about at the leadership conference, several folks brought up HB5 as Ms. Bricker brought up just a little while ago, and how the efforts built into HB 5 and alignment between K-12 and higher ed could really complement this goal. And we'd like to leverage that. Although as I was listening this morning, it may not just be vertical alignment between K-12 and higher ed. Maybe this even needs to be worded more broadly so that it's just curriculum alignment, and that would also include between higher ed and workforce. Because we heard a lot this morning about how they're building systems, TSDC is building systems to look at job descriptions and flesh out how those translate or transfer into educational curriculum. And so this strategy could even be written more broadly to include both vertical alignment and alignment between curriculum and workforce needs. But those are the changes that we made based on the Leadership Council. It occurs to us that several of you may be serving on boards locally that are talking about workforce development or talking about marketable skills. And I wondered if any other of you who haven't spoken up are serving in that capacity at home, and would you be willing to share what you've talked about if you're serving on those boards? Is anybody else serving on a board like that besides? No? Oh, okay. Never mind. So, Dr. Gardner, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk to you mid-bite. Did you have anything else to add in terms of the changes we've made to marketable skills?
I know, I apologize. I was following up with Rich and Mike about some additional things we have to do. I think there's... Let's get you turned on. I'd just like to say that I think one of the encouraging things about this morning is that I think there's still a sense that some of the broader aspects of higher education remain important and are still valued, and that I think all the programs that we're working on have value, but I think there are things that we clearly need to do a better job of that you've talked about a little bit before, but one of them is, for example, if you looked at the anthropology major that showed the salary for $22,000. I can tell you if you look at our data 5 years later, they're going to be doing much better than that. But I think most anthropology programs would not be alerting that major to the career alternatives they might have and which really fit very well with anthropology. And I know that we heard from Eva this morning, her background is in industrial relations at Cornell, but having known something about that from 20 years ago when I was in New York, I mean, there's a strong foundation in that program, sociology, anthropology, some business, little industrial engineering, and we need to do a better job of talking about skills embedded within programs, while at the same time recognizing, I think, Dr. Faulkner's point is many industry wants you to train them for exactly what they do in that industry, and you know, when Mike was talking about the different kinds of the aerospace industry wanting these small specifics, can we reasonably do that? I think in TSDC they can do that better, but not generally. So but I'm wondering if we need to develop some type of learning model for the state. We sort of referenced it in the first strategy, but is there some way we can develop a stronger relationship at a state level between industry, the Workforce Commission, TEA, the Coordinating Board, and institutions to talk about some of the high-level gaps that may be there, and that institutions can turn around, they can do whatever they want with specific industry, but I keep hearing about this soft skill aspect. In fact, they're now embedded in our core curriculum, but we don't seem to have adequately addressed that somehow. And so that's something that I keep hearing from every area that we still need. You hear it from the engineers. I know 30 years ago, I think I told you the engineering dean at A&M told me that the main thing that they had complaints about was that their graduates couldn't write a memo anyone could understand. I'm not sure if that's still true, but communications remains an issue. And so how do we get into this dialogue with industry, start developing it in high school, but not get it into too much of the real nuts and bolts? I think that's better left to a local level. But to make sure we progress. And I can tell you, we made one effort 3 or 4 years ago with the tech industry, and we probably didn't manage it very well, but we didn't get much out of that. And so, when Steve mentions, that maybe industry doesn't communicate their needs as well, we need to probably learn a little bit better how to elicit those needs. General statement, but I think there's something there that we can do at a state level in some means, I don't know exactly what it is, to make sure that we have this continuing dialogue that provides large general direction, but still leave the details to the individual institutions.
Larry?
Yes, I'd like to comment on the definition of marketable skills. Could you put that back up? It'll be easier if we can see it. There we go. I would like to suggest that that last sentence needs some work. These skills can be either primary or complementary to a major and are acquired by students through curriculum delivery. My sense is that a lot of the things people are talking about as soft skills are also acquired in other aspects of student life. They aren't just restricted to curriculum delivery. So I would change that to read and may be acquired through curriculum delivery or are acquired through curriculum delivery and other aspects of student life, or some language like that. Because I think there is potential here, even if we're our focus is on getting institutions to pay more conscious attention to this matters. But that conscious attention could be paid either in curricular design or in conscious design of student experiences that aren't curricular. So I'd like to be sure that it's obvious to anybody who reads this that many of those skills are developed better actually outside of curricular experiences. So
I concur with that. Often copying to
yeah.
colleague over a cup of coffee, which you really.
And even through, I've talked to people in the industry in the past. One person I knew in Exxon was telling me that it's people involved in student government, people involved in various kinds of clubs where they have leadership positions. Those meeting with a professor at maybe their home on Thursday nights, you're right, all those do fit together in an important kind of way.
The team experiences are often developed better outside that. On the other hand, I think we don't want language that takes the curriculum off the hook. So I think we want to say that to the extent practical, these skills should be developed in the curriculum, but that other kinds of experiences also play a role. So I don't know. This is not the place to try to write the sentence. I'm just trying to drive at what the issue is.
Quick comment. I absolutely agree with Larry's modification of the definition. Also, along with Ginger's comment earlier about item number 6, the sixth strategy underneath here, that include. I think it would align with the revised definition for that to be vertical curriculum and workforce development. That we align those K through 12 and higher ed.
Yes, Jim.
I hung up on the 80 goal, the goal number 5. Reading in another way, you could say our goal is to have 20% are enrolled.
Less than
certificate, and that, I'm not real comfortable with that. I'm not going to say it, but opposite reading of the bill.
Problem is we don't know about the 20%.
That's
right.
Now, are they still in school or what?
And that concern when we originally pitched this as a goal was exactly why we didn't use it as a goal, and we can only find who we have in the data. So that's why we left it as a maintenance goal, because if that number drops, then there's something happening economically that we need to pay attention to. It'd be great if it increases, but we recognize that institutions may not have control over that, and indeed it is often a positive outcome when students, they graduate, leave the state to find employment.
Woody.
Yes, Kathy.
Ginger, when we look under the collaboration, if it's not captured, then sometimes we don't, we forget about it. If you look at the chambers of commerce today, their roles have changed. I don't think the workforce development boards are quite what they were before. And so I'm thinking maybe we ought to include trade associations and associations of human resource executives or managers. Those are the people that know where the gaps are in the skills and the employees that their industries need. And they may be a better source.
Thank you. We haven't heard that suggestion before, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Larry?
Let me go back to this item 4 on that was just raised, the 80% item. Would it be practical for us to phrase this by saying by 2030, at least 95% of students remaining in Texas will be found working or enrolled within 1 year of earning a degree or certificate? I'm not saying that we care how many of them remain in Texas. I suppose we do care, but we're not setting that as a goal. The question is, the issue of this 80% is that we just lose track of the ones who leave the state, right? So we're masking the fact that we can't know any better than this. Would we be better off just saying explicitly the base we're measuring are those who stay here?
If, in fact, and I don't know, I'm not certain we can identify whether people are actually in Texas or not, but if we can do that, I've been wondering if, I don't think we're currently linking to the unemployment records, but if we can do that, I think then that becomes a very viable way of doing it, because it makes sense. We want, if they're staying here, we want them employed.
It's a more positive statement. This seems, I agree with Jim, this is weak.
If we'd like for them to stay in Texas, but they're successful somewhere else.
No, we're not saying we want them to stay in Texas.
Them.
We're just saying that that's the base that we're measuring, because that's what we have access to.
It's more. No, I think we'll.
Well, we've talked about it. At this time, we don't have that information. I'll go back and get the details, but it's something we've talked about, whether we may be able to get it. I think
that would be exactly the way to do it. If we can get that other piece, we can say that with some certainty.
Well, we need a statement that seems somehow more ambitious.
Yeah, well, but true enough.
Yes, Jerry.
Well, let's say we're going to do that unless we find it's impossible to do. Let's just assume we're going to do it.
We would lose, though, if we had that, we would lose some sense out of all the graduates, though, that we found a certain percentage of them. If we just look at those found in Texas, that would be the only piece that
I understand
we wouldn't
that, but
have.
I think the point is that we're moving in a little different direction by doing this. So, yeah.
Jerry?
I think the intent behind number 4 is that everybody that has graduated and is looking for a job can find a job. And I don't know how to incorporate that into the percentage. In other words, there's some that are not going to be looking for a job, or they're not going to be enrolled. And I don't know how to weave that into this goal number 4, because my reaction to number 4 is the same as Dr. Faulkner's. It doesn't sound very aspirational to aim at 80%. So I guess if you have a thought or a comment on that, I'd be interested in it.
Well, we have talked about this week as we've added the target back in. And in fact, Dr. Peebles asked me the same question a few days ago. This doesn't look very ambitious. We're just keeping the goal the same. And it's true. It's a challenge to work in the people who are looking and finding a job, because we can only find who are in the data. And you may have a fantastic group of students who are entrepreneurial and start their own business. And if they're self-employed, they won't show up in these data. So it may be a combination of being more ambitious, coupled with very clearly stating what these data can actually measure, because we don't want people to misunderstand who we can find. So we'll go back and look at the details again to find out what exactly we can.
What it may mean, Ginger, is that maybe we need to think about what you should do with a survey, is that we need to do some measure of non-response bias, and so we could sample from those people, the graduates we're not finding, and follow up with a survey and find out exactly what they're doing. And that wouldn't be that high a cost to do once you actually design it.
Right. If we have a good sample design, it won't be.
Yeah.
I'd like to raise a question that really applies to all four goals, but more so on our marketable skills and the debt. And that's our timeline. I mean, you touched on it a little earlier, and it was raised in the meeting on the 21st. I mean, we started off, this is a 15-year plan. I mean, somebody decided this was a 15-year plan. So we've been operating on that assumption. The OECD has got a target of 2025. Our U.S. administration has a target to 2025. So we picked that 2030 sounds good. We'll have 60. We'll use their 2025 because we're a little bit behind. There's logic and intuitive logic to use the 60% in 2030. And obviously the completion goal, the 550, is driven by demographics and how many you actually have to have graduating to be able to achieve the 60% in 2030. But when you get to goal 3 and 4, marketable skills and how long it's going to get there, and I know we've laid out the benchmarks here, 2020, 2025, but I'm not sure how we got there and whether that can't, I mean, given the testimony that we had earlier today, can't we achieve a lot more, a lot quicker on marketable skills? And then also in student debt, I mean, why would we wait to 2030 that ought to be an immediate goal that we would try to achieve, and we're not that far off of it right now, I don't believe. So that could be a much shorter term goal, still within a 15-year plan, but I'm just raising the timeline issues of trying to work toward 2030 on everything.
Yeah. What we haven't done, you're reminding me of it, is, within closing the gaps, we had the target for 2015, but we had actually where we were aiming for clearly, aside from our targets, where did we want to be in 2005, where did we want to be in 2010, and some major things, and we could incorporate that here. I know, especially in the marketable skills, a lot of people believe we could get a lot further along. I mean, we could achieve much of this well before 2030. And the more I've talked to people at individual schools, I've been encouraged by efforts that are going on that sort of are under the radar, at least in some areas where they're concerned about what's happening with their graduates and the development means to do some of these. So that may be really something we need to bring to you at the February meeting, at least the beginning of something more targeted for the 5-year increments.
And I think the political issues, if they're the 3 and 4, I mean, student debt is certainly a topic of, and the marketable skill. I mean, connecting our educational expenditures and outcomes to the workforce are two pretty immediate issues. To the extent that we're dealing with them in a shorter term, maybe we build a stronger argument for the overall plan. Right. Yes, Steve.
My only question, this is probably one that's already considered in here, so if I just miss something, whether or not we have 80% employed or 95% employed, it's going to make a lot of difference what the economy is. And so right now, 95% looks like it's something, but if the oil economy stays the way it is for 2 or 3 or 4 more years, we might not, having 95% may have nothing to do with how good we are in terms of educating our kids. It has to do with baseline economy. And so is there some way we can fudge that a little bit to say, look at it in terms of some kind of other employment base, 80% relative to,
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. But one thing we've assumed, but it doesn't fully address that, is as with closing the gaps, because we would regularly evaluate where we are. And in fact, in the beginning, the first 10 years, at every quarterly board meeting, we reviewed the number of years. We've made adjustments based upon changes, including your changed demographic projections, some of the changes in terms of federal dollars from NSF or NRC really that was being reported. We didn't fully take into account enrollment declines at TSU when we set our African American figures and boosted that figure a lot. So I think one thing, even though we may need to do something like you're talking about in terms of putting it into the definition, but I think it would be important to emphasize, if you agree, that our board needs to make sure we regularly examine the goals and targets and consider things in the environment. And in the past, we actually made the goals much more and targets more aggressive. It tended to be in that direction as we went along and had success. But I think it's important to emphasize that we keep the context in place and we'd not be totally slavish to where we're going, but understand the world has changed, maybe just not Texas.
Now, in a certain sense, we're in a competitive environment, and I think most forecast right now is the change in oil price, if it lasts for a while, is going to be positive for the country. So it might not be positive for Texas, and so our unemployment might go up, and we might have less in-migration and more out-migration of educated workers. So there's a lot of, it's pretty hard to know what the changed circumstances there, but it's because it's so dynamic.
And in this case, one of the important roles I think Ginger mentioned is that way to make sure we're paying attention, so that if we fall below a certain level, we say, why is it? And there may be good reasons, but
I'm not against doing that at all. I'm just saying that if you take this up to 95%, you are dealing with things where you very well could have you do the measurement in a bad employment year. 95% employment, ask an economist, is miraculous for any group of people. And so we're taking from 80 up to 95, and yes, they've finished a degree, but at least and I'm not an economist, but the studies I've looked at, there aren't very many 95% economies in the world under any circumstances.
I took so 95% was just a number grabbed out of the air.
Yeah,
meant to be a bigger number than 80. I presume that they would look at what is actually true, and we would have to calibrate.
My only point is again not the 95. I'm just saying that maybe 80 is not right, but maybe 95 is too high compared to what the economy. Because things I've seen talk about full employment economies that 95, 90% are pretty darn good economies, and so what we're saying is our people have to be employed at a level that's the highest. Yeah, it's a little bit like saying all of our sprinters have to be 109 seconds.
This, of course, is a small sliver of the total economy and the workforce as well, because it's only the graduates.
Yeah,
but I think it still applies, and we know in recent years graduates have had a very difficult time in the first 6 months, and it's been better from 6 to 12. And the last 2 years that we're going back to the way it was before, but that's going to cycle exactly the way you say, even though it's a small sliver. But we'll go back and look at that more deliberately than we have. And
Let's go in this direction. We'll start with Steve and then Kathy and then Lori.
So, I think when Larry threw that number out, 95%, it was, to me, for dramatic effect, right? It needs to be more aggressive, and I think we all want an aggressive goal, but to Steve's point, it needs to be realistic. We could, because we can't, when you think about the economy, there's so many things that come into play. Whatever the goal is, I think maybe we need to qualify by saying in any economy. So, we can't foresee the future, but we want, our goal is that we have a certain attainment in any economy.
Yeah.
So perhaps think about the language. We don't need to get into wordsmithing here, but I think we do need to put that qualifier in there, and it does need to be more aggressive than 80%.
And we can come up with some numbers probably for a decade, where we have some down and up, to see how this number actually worked out in reality in Texas in recent history, and share that with you, because we have had those fluctuations during that same time period. So I think that's something we ought to look at, and we'll bring that to you.
Kathy?
Didn't we, in Closing the Gaps, have some prefaces and some opening statements before we got into everything? And couldn't the state of the economy be discussed in a foreword? Because while it might, if it's a bad economy, it will hurt us on 3. Statistically, it'll help us on 1 and 2. So it's just an acknowledgement.
Yeah, that is something we did. We did it within the context of the goals. So when you get into this particular goal, that could be mentioned. But at the same time, you don't want it to be an out if it's not really dramatically affected. So, but yeah, all of this has to fit with what's really going on in the world. Otherwise, it's another on-the-shelf plan. It's got to be a real plan and something that we know we have to take those things into account. So, in fact, I think with the draft that we hope to share within a couple of days, with a redraft of our draft with Chair and Vice Chair and the Commissioner, and then share with you guys later. I think there's some of that in there, and I see Ramona's taking notes in the back. We'll get that.
All right, Lori?
Yes, to underscore that point, I think that the coordinating board became aware that you were going to be regularly updating the information, looking at the disaggregated parts of each goal, and that we had an opportunity at that time to actually, change the goals within participation and success. So I'm wondering if maybe it would be worthwhile somehow in the content of the overall strategy for whatever we're going to be calling this over the next 15 years, that it says that we will be regularly assessing each of the goals and targets and bringing them to the board, so that I think the board knew, but I don't think the institutions knew, and the general public and the businesses knew that we were going to be constantly reassessing. And that might be something to keep in mind if I were an institution, knowing that it's not going to be 15 years before we change that goal, that it could be right in midstream.
I don't know to what extent they knew, but one thing we'll be doing is we'll be reshaping the accountability system to fit with whatever shape this plan takes. We did regularly communicate at our governing board conference, especially for the new regents and trustees. So some of you I know sat in on those where you had to listen to Susan and me go through these things, sometimes year after year after year. But we need to do that. The whole aspect of this, really the big piece of the success of Closing the Gaps was that the board was somewhat relentless in sending the message out. I was really relieved. The University of Pennsylvania did a study recently, and they came in and talked to 200 people in the state, and everybody that they talked to could tell them in some detail what Closing the Gaps meant and how it applied to them. So in various different places. Let me announce, I want to announce this right now. We didn't have graduation rates in Closing the Gaps. We only talked about success, but Susan and her staff just calculated the most recent 6-year graduation rates for universities. We surpassed 60% for the first time. That is a huge success. And it's not because the board told people at institutions exactly how to do it. It's a real success on the part of institutions in changing their culture and moving people forward. And this is a time where we've had a dramatic increase in the number of, this is 6-year graduation rate is just universities, a dramatic increase in the number of students on Pell Grants, a dramatic increase with students first time in college. And if you looked at the prior research, there's no way that would have happened. And it's because the institutions embrace this, where they formally did or not. Sometimes a good plan is one in which people begin to to implement aspects of things and they don't even know it has anything directly to do with the plan. It just becomes part of what they do. And I think our institutions deserve a lot of credit for that, and we're going to put out a press release on that this week to make a point. We've had improvements at community colleges as well, not quite as dramatic because their population is a lot more varied in terms of their intent. But I'm sorry to put in a commercial there, but I'm so proud of all the institutions. I think it needs to be mentioned, and I think it's a good way to start this legislative session for people to know there have been real legitimate progress, and every one of those students is better off for the efforts, and at least 80% of them are employed.
David, do you think it would be reasonable for as far as the marketable goal for the staff, yourself and the staff, to go back and take a look at the timeline, to ask ourselves, I mean, we're not trying to fill in between 2015 and 2030 on some incremental basis. We're trying to say from now, or from 2015, this year going forward, how long does it take us to actually accomplish the goal? And does it take us 15 years to be able to say that we're going to hit this, whatever that percentage might be, that has a marketable skill?
And really what should be there should be almost matter of fact by then is what we would hope. So we really need to get something earlier. And we're learning more and more things. I don't think you have anything in your packet from University of Kent. There's some things going on in Europe that are very focused on this. But at our Graduate Education Advisory Committee just yesterday, someone mentioned what they are doing in Ireland in terms of essentially marketable skills for PhD graduates. So as we're going forward, there are a number of things that are sort of bubbling up from the field that I think will mean that we can kickstart this in an even greater fashion than we might have imagined, which is, I think, where you're getting.
Right, and I think really, and you got some of that at the conference, once you raise the concept, the question is going to be, why not now? In other words, everybody will understand from a capacity and a demographic standpoint why you're not going to have 550,000 completions next year, or why we won't be at 60% if we're at 38%. But it's a harder answer to say, why can't we slow down the debt and or solve this gap between demand and supply where we've got a much better match?
And to let you know, we've talked some at the staff level about possibly having a conference in June, specifically on marketable skills, with some people from industry, institutions, even before the plan is adopted. We think it's an important thing to do to help kickstart that, and with a little bit of money we have from some small foundation in Houston that might help us do that. So we're trying to move ahead even as you're doing this, to kickstart some of these things. And
Bob?
I was just making a comment relative to the issue that we're facing here, and that's a kind of a blend between knowing that a document of this type has to have a dynamic element to it. It is not something just cast in stone, and by golly, that's the way it's going to happen. But on the other flip side of that is to make sure that we don't imply that it's a rubber ruler out there and you just kind of stretch it depending on what you want the answer to look like. So as a consequence, that it seems to me that we do need to set out these goals in here. It's very appropriate for the board itself to examine these on a periodic basis and then kind of get the feedback going back in there that makes sense. But I don't think we want to convey to the elements that have to pull this stuff off that, oh yeah, well, don't worry about it, next year they'll change the numbers on you. And it needs to have a dynamic element, but a message out there that this is what we would like to see happen over the next decade or whatever the measurement is.
Yes, okay. Yes, Ramon?
The dynamics has to exist because of changes in the economy. Are we in fact looking at the employment rate? And if we're doing that, then why not just say that our graduates will be employed at a rate higher than the current employment rate? And as it changes, the other one changes. I mean, if it's not as high as the employment rate, then why even get an education? And if that's the case, then maybe we ought to even eliminate the 2030. It ought to be happening right now.
Yeah, well, every one of these measures has a problem, and so part of the problem inherent to that is right now, nationally, I don't know what is in Texas, but nationally the unemployment rate for people with a college education, last I looked, was about 3.2%. So it's actually below the overall, and this is something different than people coming directly out of college, but that the data suggests is almost more important than their earnings, but that if you have a college education, you're less likely to remain unemployed than if you didn't have one. And so then we have to that might be going too easy on ourselves. It's hard to know. We'll try to come forward with a couple of alternatives.
External, I think, advice there that from an economist that deals in the labor markets, which they've got people at UT Austin that can help us craft that, perhaps.
Well, we actually have an ongoing relationship right now with RAND. We have an IES grant with them. We could probably get some feedback on that very shortly.
Well, another factor that
I'm sorry? Oh, he can tell. Yeah, that.
Another factor that we can't lose sight of is that this measure isn't just about employment. A large fraction of the exiting student population goes on to other forms of education, to graduate school or professional school. And this measure, as it's formulated, encompasses that. If we just went to an unemployment rate, it would be more complicated because we still have this block of people that are going to other schools.
That's right. And some majors we know historically, that graduate school is assumed to begin with at an undergraduate level. So your biological sciences, a significant percentage of them know that they're likely to go on for some type of graduate degree. It could be a wide range of fields, but could do that. And in fact, even in our business schools, we have a significant number go directly into an MBA program following graduation, or an MSc in accounting.
There's one other element in there that just occurred to me. We're assuming that every person that gets a degree or a certificate is going into the job market, needs and wants to. There are a lot of people who are family-oriented, and how do you account for those people that said, yes, I've got a degree, but my initial job here is working with my family? And that can be both male and female. How about that for a zinger, huh?
No, and actually I was thinking about that earlier, but it's really already embedded in these figures. I don't think we're going to have that happening more. Stay-at-home parents, and at least almost all the stay-at-home parents I've known are pretty high income levels. So I don't know, but the problem with doing a state plan is there are always additional nuances, and I think we have to make sure the general push is in the right direction and that we be aware of all these other things and find ways to monitor them.
One of the ways we address that very indirectly is that because we're using a number that's been relatively stable over time, or that has has an incremental increase. So when we look at the trend line, it's sort of a validation of the data. So again, if we see a major change in it, if perhaps we find that more people are staying at home, then that's a shift in what's happened in the past, and we need to learn more about that. So however we value that as an outcome, it at least indicates to us change, so we can better understand what change is happening if and when it does.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry.
What's the percentage of out-of-state or international students that have no intention of staying in Texas? And should we factor that in or change the wording to say, at least 80% of students remaining in Texas? Because we have no way of knowing where everybody else, the international
Dr. Faulkner's
students.
suggestion was to focus it on people who stay in Texas.
Right. So, and we've got wording for that, or somehow?
We'll come up with that.
Okay.
We'll come up with that. And we do know, of course, how many students are from other states, and if they're come from other countries, we would have no way of knowing what their intent is to stay or go.
Well, their intent is more or less irrelevant. If they don't have a work visa, they can't work.
That's right. Yeah. True. Okay, should we move on to our other three goals? Any more questions on marketable? I'm sorry, Jerry? Other questions on marketable? Okay, and Susan's going to talk about the goal one. I did have a dialogue between our last meeting and now around this, which I think the coordinating board staff has responded to. Started thinking about the 60%, which is kind of this international number that we picked up, which is totally quantity. It's not quality. It wasn't really answering the question, what's the relationship between certificates and associate degrees and bachelor's degrees or greater within that? And clearly, if we're in 2030 and we've got 60%, and they're all getting certificates, we've had a quality differential from our baseline. So it told me that we need to decompose that number at some level, and whether we target it on a per capita population or whether we do, as we picked up here, trying to break the percentages down. But somehow we need to have a quality piece that goes with the quantity piece. And I'm not trying to draw conclusions that if we're trying to get to 60%, we might be in a world that has more associate degrees and more certificates than we did at one time in the past. And that's probably to be celebrated and not to be criticized, because it's going to be more responsive to the marketable skill workforce. So that was one question. And then I looked at the 25 to 34-year-old, which I think is an appropriate age group to goal, because that's really what all of our our really K through 16 pipeline is spilling right into that. And that's what employers look at as far as they're making investments in job creation decisions. But at the same time, what nagged at me is we've got a whole population, some of which are in that category, but some of which might be exiting that category in our time period, that have some level of higher education attainment, and in one sense are probably the low cost. If we want to try to get to completions, we've got some of our low cost short time completions within that group, but they wouldn't be necessarily measured in the 25 to 34-year-old. So somehow the thought was, and communicated to staff, was we need to have some sub goals, or we need not to lose what's a very important part of trying to raise the overall post-secondary attainment of our workforce, and not just send the message that it's all about the 25 to 34-year-olds. So I don't know whether you want to make any comments, David. I know you've responded to these, but what's your thoughts? You and I haven't had a chance to talk about it.
No, we haven't. I think to begin with, the first part of your remarks at the beginning of that discussion is the target 6, where we talk about it says maintaining the percent with these certain types of degrees, and whether we want to really maintain or change that mix is something we haven't talked about.
Right.
I do think we could clearly have a target that addressed the overall educational attainment of Texas. I think the point Dr. Faulkner may want to speak to directly in terms of focusing on the goal in terms of 25 to 34 is something we can clearly target in terms of people going through education now, and we can directly impact that during the course of this plan. But we may want to have a target that addresses, sort of sub to that, what's really happening with the overall population of the state, and we could do that quite easily. And again, provide some context. Are we gaining there? Are we really losing ground overall, which could happen? And a lot of these same variables Steve was talking about earlier in terms of the economy, and and one of my concerns always about this, really wanting to characterize this as a state goal, is our institutions can do great in graduating people, but if our economy is bad, they can leave the state. Our institutions could be doing badly, but the economy is great, so we're importing everyone or some mix. But we could add a target for the overall educational attainment.
As far as the adult learner that's might or might not be still in the 25.
Yeah, we'd include the total population.
I saw your definition there of once you've been out a certain period of time, you now fall into the adult learner category who might or might not have some post-secondary attainment.
Right. And we have some strategies that directly address that population. We think it's important. There are several populations. I just met with a different population over at the Supreme Court yesterday on their judge's effort on foster children. I mean, that's another group of it's not a huge number of people, but it can have a huge impact on the state. So I think part of it is we need to look at all these sort of strata. They may not make it directly into the plan, but make sure that we're not ignoring populations that can make a large difference. I mean, if those students make it into the higher ed system, I mean, too few actually graduate from high school, but they would have the poor opportunity, depending on how you look at it, but they're likely to become some of those adult learners that we're concerned about in another 10 years if we don't address their needs immediately. But
David, I had a question on the wording of Target 6, and it starts out with maintain. Is that really the word you want to use in there, maintain? You're going from, like in certificates, 5% to 7%. But is that really, are we maintaining that, or is this a goal that we're trying to achieve, or is this a distribution that, I guess I'm a little perplexed by how that is, what we're trying to convey by that particular statement, I guess.
And it probably could be worded a little bit more craftier. The maintain part is what we did here was create the same proportion of each level while raising it up to a 60%. So right now we're at about 38 for this, but the percentage of associates and baccalaureate degrees, masters, and so forth, they're the same proportion of that 60% as they are with the 38%.
Yeah.
So we wanted to maintain that distribution.
That's a worthy way of stating it, but I don't think this doesn't convey that to me. That
I don't think it does either.
If you say yes, we would like to make sure that each one of these types of achievements in here will be raised proportionately or something like that, then I understand.
Maintain the quality, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but we're not even really sure that the group wants to maintain the same distribution, so that's a discussion.
But Larry's next, then Steve.
Let me suggest, David, on the question of the older learners that you were talking about, goals relating to them. The place it seems to me to deal with that is actually under the second goal.
Now, I call your attention to number 8, the target. Staff just reminded me we had deliberately included. I think
right. Okay.
You're heading
well,
up.
you've got it there. Okay. What I think it seems to me that if you're going to have the goal that we have, what do we call these things? Targets, goals. I don't remember what's a target and what's a goal. But anyway, the large rubric. The first one, of course, says right up there in the top, educational attainment by 2030, at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34. It's pretty hard to dilute that with statements relevant to other demographic groups if you've got it right there in the top. It seems to me that's the appropriate thing to do because that's the group we can actually get any leverage on. I think there's going to be text associated with this, right? We can say we're focusing this goal on this group because that's the one we have leverage on. That older learners are also important to the future of Texas, and their accomplishments will be dealt with under the next one of these. That me?
That of the adult learners is also thousands and thousands of students that the state and the students already invested in education, but they haven't completed it. So it's both people who haven't attended plus people who haven't reaped the full benefit. Right. And so it's really sort of recouping some of that investment we've already made, and then addressing those students who've had no benefit whatsoever.
But it's fundamentally these issues, the older learners or the recouping, those are individual success stories where the successes are going to be told in numbers of individuals, not in percentage terms. that first goal or first target or whatever it is about a rate. And the only place to deal with rates, I think, is with a young enough group that you actually have a chance to address them.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I have a question, and I realize we've done this before, but having done some of this work when I was head of evaluation for a big drug program at one point in time, I tried not to have too many places to hang myself. And you got enough statistics in these 6 goals that if you made all of them, if you missed 3 of them, I can say you're an abysmal failure, even though there's 12 or whatever there is of all the different ones. And I'm really wondering, do we really want to have 6 different parts of this that are 7% here, 2% there, 33% there, 49%? I mean, it strikes me as, whether we did it before or not, a little bit of an overkill.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's
really is a response to a question on should quality be a part of it, without really giving an answer. But how do we introduce quality? So getting back to my earlier example, that 60% in certificates in 2030 we would meet our 60% goal, but that's not how we intend to meet our goal. So how do we have a quality element in there without, and maybe we can do it without all these sub goals that end up becoming criteria for success or failure?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, I'm a pretty simple guy, but it seems to me the overall arching goal says it pretty quickly. I mean, we can say whether we want it 60% or 80%, but I really think when we start getting into all of these 6 and the percents that are in all of them, you're going to fail. Someplace you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And depending on what situations are, that'll be either okay or, boy, what's wrong with you guys? You had 27 goals and you only achieved 25 of them. And I guess my question is, you got to go. By 2030, at least 60% of Texans will have a post-secondary credential or degree. Isn't that enough?
Well, let me respond to part of that. And I think you would agree with part of this is that we couldn't. We've done great in terms of participation goal for closing the gaps, but we haven't gotten where we need to be for Hispanics, which is one of our targets.
Okay.
And so that's part of how we've seen targets is that you haven't fully achieved your overall goal. So it may be we have too many targets at this point, but I think there's some key things. So, for example, we want to make sure we don't leave out economically disadvantaged students. So we want to make sure that we're graduating, doing a better job with economically disadvantaged students. We want to still make sure we do better with certain ethnic groups than we're doing now. And so, so we may need fewer. And one other thing, and it sounds now, I thought you were talking about this, but there's an implied accuracy here that isn't necessarily there when you talk about 37% and 11%. An inferred precision that I don't think is really accurate at this point. And so I think some of these numbers should be a little bit
I wouldn't have
more,
a problem taking your goal and say this will include X percent of African Americans and Y percent of Hispanics, etc. I'm just saying when you the number 7 to me is insane. We're going to have 7% associate, 11% baccalaureate, 31% master's degrees. I think it's beyond the pale of
Is this document going to be presented to the legislature?
I don't know what will happen with the legislature. It depends.
I'm just telling you, I agree with Steve. If you present this, isn't going to cut it.
Well, they will know that at some part. But remember, the targets have been put. We haven't had the same discussion with the targets we've had with the goals, and so there's some of these targets we hope to hear this kind of discussion that they maybe shouldn't be here at all, or maybe there should be something more general. I think we were just talking about the adult learners. I think we almost have to have a target if we want to make sure that we still address that. And I think you don't want that to become a goal in and of itself, because then you end up with some of these plans have 50 or 60 goals that nobody remembers what any of them are. So
I think
there's that balance, and so we need your guidance on the targets.
The point is, and I've said this many times, this document ultimately is a political statement because we need support for investment and policies to make it happen. Some of what we've just discussed here, you could argue that that's going to make it less effective as a political document. And so the question is, I still think there's some reasonable questions, whether it's adult learners or the quality of the output, that certainly this institution, the coordinating board, needs to be aware of, stay on top of, and both staff and the board. Doesn't necessarily have to be a part of the plan.
Well, I'm not a politician, but I don't want to give this to a bunch of politicians to look at.
So could we ask, I was just looking at 10 minutes left, so could we possibly, one way to initially address this is send this out to you and have you essentially tell us, check those targets that you think are important to maintain, and then we can sort of bring that back to you at the next meeting, and then we have a more focused discussion of the targets and move forward on that.
David, I think, and Steve, I think we're at a point that the committee needs to start, particularly as we come up with the first draft, but actually, and as we look at this, needs to begin to ask as many questions as they can. I mean, some of these were ones that raised today, and the committee collectively needs to decide.
Yeah. Okay.
But we're the audience here to try to understand is what's our somebody else looking at this, what's the reaction going to be? And I think you've made some very good points, and it'll probably going to modify. But I think we need to all be trying to ask those questions, and then we'll make the decisions on each and every one of them.
And let me point out to you, they're going to pull it up on the screen real quickly, that the Senate Committee on Higher Education just came out with recommendations for the next higher education strategic plan. And so the staff has done we don't really have any time to discuss this, a side-by-side for you, and you have it on paper, which says what were their recommendations, and then just the staff responses, how was what you're talking about reflect or not reflect that at this point. So that's this just came out within the last few days, so we wanted to make you aware of that. And then recall at the next meeting, one of your speakers will be from the governor's office, so there'll be an opportunity to discuss some of these things in more detail. But we're at that important phase now in terms of sort of some of its nuances, some of its do we really have the right focus or not, and I do believe we haven't really had adequate discussion on the targets as yet.
Steve, you know that your comment, I think, is on target. Maybe what we need is more strategies and fewer targets. The strategies you can talk about, and they're a dynamic element in there, whereas a target becomes pretty specific.
A different view of that, and I'm not sure, I think there's a balance between here. We're still trying to maintain some things that you give the institutions a latitude on how to address it without telling them how to do it. And I think we need some key strategies that are important statewide, but I think at the same time we need to not be too overly directive in terms of how institutions should bring about some of these things. And that's a balance you guys have to figure out what you're comfortable with.
Is this from the interim assignments?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's less than 50% in most cases.
Oh, I know, but we thought we should let you know.
Okay, so I wouldn't really spend a whole lot of time except for once-time review, because unless somebody tackles one of these with a specific bill, it ain't going to happen. And so when they do interim is not. I mean, it's up here, and unless somebody grabs it, it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but we think, as being a good staff to you, we have to let you aware that it's hanging out there. But I appreciate your balance to that.
Chances of a bill are probably slim or none, depending on whether somebody bought into it.
And again, our board won't be approving a plan one way
or the other until after the session is over.
Steve?
So I know we only have a few minutes left, so how will we get to calling down the metrics? I think someone made a recommendation that you send them out to us and we give feedback.
Well, I think
How are
we
we
could get
going
a
to get
first
there?
pass on that if that would be acceptable, at least for you to go through and say this is a target that definitely makes sense to keep, and then we can sort of pull that together, and then we can use that to start the discussion. So this part of the meeting next time we could have focused directly on the targets if you would like. That would be easy to do, and we really need to make sure that happens.
Right. And the feedback, I think, from the committee to the staff is increasingly important as we try to craft this document.
So that would be our homework before the next committee meeting? Is that?
If that works for the chair and vice chair,
Yeah.
that'll be the easy thing to do. We'll send that document out to you, or maybe do an online survey or something. We'll figure out a way to do that.
Can you resend the closing the gaps?
Sure.
I just said, I mean, all of it, because where we are today, it's like we're emasculating almost at this very moment everything that we would ask the board to consider on a quarterly basis. Because we're not going to have any targets. So and somehow 200 participants in that survey knew about closing the gaps. So it's kind of like, what's the executive summary and how you sell it, blah, blah, blah. So I think that to put in perspective what's happened over the last 15 years, just remind us. Of course, I still have mine, but.
We'd be glad to do that. And you
We'll find things when you get down to more, smaller level that haven't happened. So it's particularly some of the strategies that went by the wayside over time. There's some things in there that have happened that nobody would remember that they were strategies in the plan. And I'm not sure they came to be because they were in the plan at all, but in fact, that they have.
There was a lot of that. And I think that's a very good idea. I mean, I've reread it, but it's been when we started this committee, so I think it's good for all of us to take another look at closing the gaps, one, and then we will have a draft. Maybe if we can turn it around, actually out to the committee members before the next meeting.
If it works for you guys, again, it's a draft. It's tried to incorporate some of the changes that we're
right.
Most tried to incorporate some of those changes. And a little bit more selling at the front end, more L&D in the second part. And that would be a good opportunity for us to feedback all committee once it's finished.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Yes, Jim. Yeah.
I was looking between 2015, most of the dollars increased 20 to 40%. Increases. One advantage student
That's the reality of us ever getting to 60%, would be the way I would put it. In other words, if we don't solve that issue, we don't get there. I mean, and it takes those kind of percentages because of the demographic change that's taken place. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Jerry.
Do I understand correctly that you're going to send something back to us, and that will be the basis of our homework?
Yes.
Okay.
There'll be a reminder to you, and if we don't hear from you, we'll remind you.
All right. Yes, Jerry.
I spent all of my teaching and student life administrator career talking about I never could have been a salesman. I never could have sold insurance or been a retail person. Then I became a college president at an independent college, and I realized that I was going to have to raise funds, and raising funds means selling, communicating, and marketing. Everybody around the state knew exactly what closing the gaps meant. Somebody needs to be creatively thinking about what this strategic plan to 2030 is actually going to be called.
You charged us with that at our first meeting. That was that not the charge?
Yeah, I think that may be in some ways our largest challenge. This plan is,
but it's vitally important.
As success. You're right, because people remember that, and I can tell you it's interesting how common that phrase has become across the country. I don't think they know they're picking it up from here, but it's in many state plans now, and it's in other areas. And you heard Eva this morning was talking about it. So
suggestion. I don't know if we've talked to you about that.
well, I was just handed Texas to and through. But actually, I had thought at one time in terms of, because we were talking about a lot of South by Southwest is maybe 60 by 30, meaning we have 60% of the population by 2030. Who knows? Somebody surely could come up with something better.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
GSD.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Something, right?
No, we went through that with the foundation, remember?
Yeah.
Safe travels.
Okay,
I know.
take care.
I know.